Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The smell hit me first. Acrid and metallic, it filled my nostrils as soon as I opened the door to room 213. My hand froze on the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But I was the night manager, and it was my job to check on guests who hadn't been seen for days. I took a deep breath, instantly regretting it as the stench coated my tongue, and stepped inside. The room was dark, curtains drawn against the feeble glow of the parking lot lights outside. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling slightly. The overhead light flickered to life, revealing a scene that would haunt me for years to come. The bed was untouched, its crisp white sheets still perfectly tucked in. But the rest of the room, God, the rest of the room. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Men's and women's garments mixed together in chaotic piles. Empty food containers littered every surface, some crusted with mold. And the smell, it was stronger now, emanating from the closed bathroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the bathroom. I didn't want to open that door. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to call the police, to do anything but confront whatever horror awaited me. But I had a job to do. I reached out, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grasp the doorknob. I turned it slowly, the metal cool against my sweaty palm. The door creaked open, and the full force of the odor hit me like a physical blow. There, in the bathtub, lay the guest from room 213. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing. He had been dead for days. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. I had to get out of there, had to call the police. I turned to flee, but a sound from the hallway stopped me cold. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They were coming closer. Panic gripped me. Who else could be here? The guest was dead and no one else had access to this floor. I looked around frantically, searching for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, praying they would move on. But then I heard it, the soft scrape of a key card being inserted into the lock. I dove for the closet, squeezing myself between hanging coats just as the door swung open. Through a crack in the closet door, I watched as a man entered the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed all in black. His face was hidden by a hood, but I could see his eyes glinting in the dim light. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the bathroom. I watched, frozen in terror, as he dragged the body from the tub. With practiced efficiency, he wrapped it in a shower curtain and hefted it over his shoulder. Then he began to clean. For what felt like hours, I remained hidden in that closet, barely daring to breathe. I watched as the man meticulously scrubbed every surface, removing all traces of the gruesome scene. He gathered up the scattered clothes, the food containers, everything that might indicate someone had been living in this room. Finally, he stood in the center of the now pristine room, surveying his work. Satisfied, he nodded to himself and headed for the door. But just before leaving, he paused. Slowly, he turned towards the closet where I was hiding. My heart stopped. Had he heard me? Did he know I was there? I pressed myself further back into the coats, willing myself to disappear. The man took a step towards the closet, then another. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, sure that at any moment he would fling open the door and find me. But then, miraculously, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and turned away. Without another look back, he left the room, taking the body with him. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore before I allowed myself to breathe again. On shaky legs, I emerged from the closet, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. What was I supposed to do now? If I called the police, would they even believe me? The room was spotless. There was no evidence that anything had happened here. And if they did believe me, what would happen to me? Would the man in black come back for me? I stumbled out of the room, my legs barely supporting me. I made it to the elevator, punching the button for the lobby with trembling fingers. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored walls. I looked pale and shell-shocked, my eyes wide with fear. The elevator dinged as it reached the lobby. I stepped out, trying to compose myself. I had to act normal. I couldn't let anyone suspect that anything was wrong. I made my way to the front desk, where my coworker, Sarah, was working the night shift. "Everything okay, Mike?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as fake as it felt. "Just tired," I lied. "Long night, you know." She nodded sympathetically. "Why don't you take a break? I can handle things for a bit." I mumbled my thanks and retreated to the break room. Once there, I collapsed into a chair, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I couldn't just pretend nothing had happened. But if I spoke up, would anyone believe me? And more importantly, would I be putting myself in danger? I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen. I should call the police. It was the right thing to do. But my finger hovered over the keypad, unable to dial. Just then, the door to the break room opened. I quickly pocketed my phone, trying to look casual. It was Carl, one of our security guards. "Hey, Mike," he said, heading for the coffee machine. "Quiet night?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Carl poured himself a cup of coffee, then turned to me with a concerned look. "You okay? You look a bit pale." I opened my mouth to reassure him, but the words stuck in my throat. Before I knew it, everything came spilling out. The body in room 213, the man in black, the cleanup. Carl listened in silence, his face growing more serious with each word. When I finished, he set down his coffee cup and looked me straight in the eye. "Mike," he said slowly, "are you sure about what you saw?" I nodded emphatically. "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. We have to call the police." Carl held up a hand. "Hold on. Let's think this through. You said the room was cleaned, right? No evidence left behind." I nodded again, confused by his reaction. "And you're the only witness," he continued. "No one else saw anything." "No, but then it's your word against, well, nothing." Think about it, Mike. If we call the police, what are they going to find? An empty, clean room, no body, no evidence of a crime. And you, claiming to have seen something impossible. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was right. It did sound impossible. Who would believe me? "But we can't just do nothing," I protested weakly. Carl sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I've been working security for a long time. I've seen things that it's better not to get involved with. My advice, forget what you saw, for your own safety." I stared at him, shocked. "You want me to just pretend it never happened?" He nodded grimly. "Sometimes, that's the safest thing to do. Trust me, Mike, you don't want to get mixed up in this." With that, he picked up his coffee and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, wrestling with my conscience. Part of me knew that Carl was right. Speaking up could be dangerous, but another part of me couldn't bear the thought of letting a murderer go free. In the end, I made my decision. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for someone to answer, I tried to calm my racing heart. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I took a deep breath. "I need to report a murder," I said, my voice shaking slightly. At the Sunset Inn, room 213. As I began to recount my story, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around the empty break room, half expecting to see the man in black standing there. But I was alone. For now, I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same after tonight. The horror of room 213 would stay with me forever, a dark secret that threatened to consume me. But I had made my choice. Now, all I could do was hope it was the right one. The headlights of my beat-up Corolla cut through the darkness, illuminating sheets of rain cascading onto the empty highway. I never pick up hitchhikers, but tonight was different. I couldn't leave someone out there in this storm. How was I to know that one act of kindness would turn into a nightmare? It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home, curl up with a good book, and forget about the world for a while. The storm had come out of nowhere, transforming the usually busy highway into a desolate stretch of asphalt. I squinted through the windshield, the wipers working overtime to clear my view. That's when I saw him. A lone figure stood on the side of the road, arm outstretched, thumb pointed hopefully towards the sky. Even from a distance, I could see he was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his body like a second skin. I felt a pang of sympathy. No one should be out in weather like this. I slowed down, my tires hissing on the wet road as I pulled over to the shoulder. The man jogged towards my car, hunched against the wind and rain. I leaned over and popped open the passenger door. "Thank you," he said as he climbed in, water dripping from his clothes onto my upholstery. "I thought I was going to be out there all night." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound friendly despite the unease creeping up my spine. Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said vaguely, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "I really appreciate this." I nodded and pulled back onto the highway, the rhythmic thump of the wipers filling the silence between us. I snuck glances at my passenger when I could. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a scruffy beard. His eyes darted around nervously, never settling on one spot for long. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "what brings you out on a night like this?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Car broke down a few miles back. Couldn't get a signal on my phone to call for help." Something about his story didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Maybe it was the way his eyes wouldn't meet mine, or the slight tremor in his voice. I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to my own paranoia. "That's rough," I said. "Lucky I came along when I did, huh?" He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, lucky." We drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the pounding rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Mind if I turn on the radio?" I asked, desperate to fill the silence. "Go ahead," he said. I reached for the dial, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. In the glow of the dashboard lights, I saw a dark stain on the sleeve of his jacket. It looked like blood. My mind raced. Had he been injured when his car broke down? Or was there a more sinister explanation? I tried to keep my breathing steady, not wanting to let on that I'd noticed anything amiss. "So," I said, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears, "where exactly am I taking you?" He shifted in his seat, and I saw his hand move towards his pocket. "Just keep driving," he said, his tone suddenly cold and commanding. "I'll let you know when to stop." My heart pounded in my chest as the realization hit me. This man wasn't just a stranded motorist. He was dangerous, possibly even a fugitive, and I was alone with him on a deserted highway in the middle of a storm. I ran through my options, each one seeming more impossible than the last. I could try to overpower him, but he was bigger than me, And who knew what he had in his pocket? I could crash the car intentionally, but at these speeds, that was as likely to kill me as it was to stop him. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I don't want any trouble. Just tell me where you want to go and I'll drop you off. No questions asked." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "It's a little late for that, don't you think? You've already seen too much." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "I haven't seen anything," I lied. "I don't even know your name. I could just let you out right here, and we could both forget this ever happened." "Nice try," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a switchblade. The sound of it opening seemed impossibly loud in the confines of the car. But I'm afraid our little road trip isn't over yet. I felt the cold press of the blade against my neck, and I knew I was out of options. I had to do something, and I had to do it now. Without warning, I slammed on the brakes, sending us both lurching forward. The blade nicked my skin, a sharp pain blooming where it had cut, but I didn't have time to worry about that now. I threw the car into park and lunged for the door handle, but he was quicker. His hand clamped down on my arm, yanking me back into the seat. I screamed, hoping against hope that someone would hear me over the storm, but I knew it was useless. "Shut up," he snarled, pressing the knife harder against my throat. "One more sound and I'll cut you ear to ear." I froze, terror paralyzing me. The rain lashed against the windows, and lightning illuminated his face in brief, terrifying flashes. His eyes were wild, filled with a manic energy that told me he was capable of anything. "Now," he said, his voice low and menacing, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to start driving again, and you're not going to stop until I tell you to. Understand?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. With shaking hands, I put the car back in drive and eased onto the gas pedal. We continued down the highway, the darkness seeming to close in around us. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way out of this nightmare. I thought about my family, my friends. Would they even know what had happened to me? Would anyone ever find out the truth? As we drove, he kept the knife pressed against me, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. He directed me to turn off the main highway onto smaller, more isolated roads. With each turn, we got further and further from civilization, from any hope of rescue. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear." He laughed again, that same chilling sound. "You still don't get it, do you? There's no going back now, for either of us." A sob caught in my throat as the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. This man wasn't just looking for a ride or even to rob me. He had something much worse planned, and I was powerless to stop it. Or was I? As we rounded a sharp curve, an idea struck me. It was risky, possibly even suicidal, but it was the only chance I had. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. In one fluid motion, I jerked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending the car careening off the road. We hit the shoulder at full speed, the tires losing traction on the wet grass. The world spun around us as we rolled, once, twice, 3 times before coming to a stop on the roof. Everything hurt. I could taste blood in my mouth, and my vision swam as I tried to focus. But I was alive, and more importantly, I was free of the knife. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I heard a groan from beside me and knew I didn't have much time. Finally, the buckle released, and I fell onto the roof of the car. Ignoring the pain shooting through my body, I crawled towards the shattered window. The rain was still coming down in sheets as I pulled myself out of the wreckage. I could hear him stirring inside the car, cursing and struggling with his own seatbelt. I didn't wait to see if he'd make it out. I ran. My legs felt like lead, and each breath sent daggers of pain through my chest. But I didn't stop. I ran through the rain and the mud, branches whipping at my face as I plunged into the woods beside the road. Behind me, I heard the sound of breaking glass and knew he had gotten out of the car. "I'm going to find you," he shouted, his voice carrying over the storm. "You can't hide from me." I ran harder, pushing my battered body to its limits. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than back there with him. The woods were dark, the trees looming over me like silent sentinels. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a harbinger of doom. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that endless night. But eventually, I saw lights in the distance, a gas station, its fluorescent glow a beacon of hope in the darkness. With the last of my strength, I staggered into the parking lot and collapsed against the door. The attendant looked up in shock, his eyes widening as he took in my battered, mud-covered appearance. "Please," I gasped, "call the police. He's after me." As the attendant reached for the phone, I sank to the floor, exhaustion finally overtaking me. I had made it. I was safe. In the distance, I heard sirens approaching, their wail cutting through the storm. And for the first time since I'd seen that lonely figure on the side of the road, I allowed myself to breathe. I had survived the longest night of my life, but I knew that the memory of that hitchhiker and the terror of our rain-soaked journey would stay with me forever. The crack of a twig underfoot shattered the night's silence, freezing me in my tracks. I'd been a forest ranger for 15 years, but nothing had prepared me for what I was about to stumble upon in the depths of these woods. As I stood there, heart pounding, I had no idea that in just a few moments, I'd be fighting not just to protect the forest, but for my very life. It was supposed to be a routine night patrol, the kind I'd done 100 times before, checking for campfires left burning or hikers who'd strayed off the marked trails. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced with each gust of wind. I'd been walking for hours, my boots crunching softly on the forest floor, when I first heard it, a low murmur of voices, barely audible over the rustle of leaves. My hand instinctively went to the radio at my hip, but I hesitated. It was probably just some campers who'd lost track of time. No need to call for backup just yet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer, careful to keep my footsteps light. As I approached a small clearing, the voices grew clearer. They weren't the jovial tones of campers enjoying a late-night chat. These were hushed, urgent whispers punctuated by the metallic click of, was that a gun being loaded? My blood ran cold. Poachers? It had to be. We'd had problems with them before, but never this deep in the protected area. I crouched behind a thick oak tree, peering around its trunk into the clearing. What I saw made my stomach lurch. 5 men, all armed with high-powered rifles, were gathered around the carcass of a magnificent elk. Its antlers, which would fetch a small fortune on the black market, had already been removed. The animal's glassy eyes seemed to stare right at me, accusing in their lifelessness. I reached for my radio again, my fingers trembling slightly. I had to call this in. But before I could press the button, a twig snapped under my boot. The sound, amplified by the night's stillness, might as well have been a gunshot. 5 heads snapped in my direction. For a heartbeat, time stood still. Then chaos erupted. "Who's there?" one of the men bellowed, swinging his rifle towards me. I didn't think. I just ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, the sound of pursuit close behind. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest. But terror kept me moving. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark inches from my head. I ducked instinctively, losing my footing on the uneven ground. I tumbled down a small embankment, leaves and twigs catching in my hair and clothes. For a moment, I lay there, winded and disoriented. The voices of the poachers grew closer. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the ache in my side where I'd hit a rock during my fall. I couldn't outrun them forever. I needed a plan. My eyes fell on a hollow log a few yards away. It was a desperate move, but it was all I had. I dove for it, squeezing my body into the tight space just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness. He went this way. A gruff voice called out. Spread out, find him. I held my breath, pressing myself further into the log. Leaves and who knows what else clung to my sweaty skin, but I didn't dare move to brush them away. The beam of a flashlight swept over my hiding spot, and I silently prayed the shadows would conceal me. Nothing here, someone muttered, frustratingly close. Maybe he doubled back. Doesn't matter, another voice replied. We need to clear out, now, before more rangers show up. I listened as their footsteps receded, hardly daring to believe my luck. But I knew better than to move just yet. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Only when the forest had been silent for a solid 10 minutes did I finally ease myself out of the log. My muscles protested as I stood, stiff from being cramped in such a small space. I took a moment to get my bearings, realizing I'd run further than I thought in my panic. The poachers' camp was at least a mile back, in the opposite direction from where they'd been searching for me. I pulled out my radio, praying it hadn't been damaged in my fall. This is Ranger Miller, I whispered urgently. I've got a code 10 at Sector 7, multiple armed suspects, requesting immediate backup. Static crackled for a moment before a voice responded. Copy that, Miller. Backup is on the way. What's your situation? I quickly relayed what I'd seen, keeping my voice low in case the poachers were still nearby. As I spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't let them get away, not when they'd already killed at least one animal. But I couldn't take on 5 armed men alone either. Stay put, Miller, the voice on the radio advised. Backup will be there in 20 minutes. I knew I should listen. It was the safe, smart thing to do. But in 20 minutes, those poachers could be long gone, taking their ill-gotten gains with them. I couldn't let that happen. Negative, I replied. I'm going to track them. They're heading east, towards the old fire road. I'll keep my distance and update on their location. Ignoring the protests from my radio, I set off in the direction I'd last seen the poachers heading. The adrenaline was wearing off, and every step sent jolts of pain through my bruised body. But I pressed on, driven by a mixture of duty and anger at what these men were doing to the forest I'd sworn to protect. As I moved through the trees, I strained my ears for any sound of the poachers. It wasn't long before I heard the low rumble of engines. They must have vehicles waiting on the fire road. I picked up my pace, my heart racing. I had to get there before they left. As I neared the edge of the tree line, I could make out the shapes of 2 pickup trucks. The poachers were loading their gear, arguing in hushed but heated tones. We should have found that ranger, one of them growled. He's probably called for backup by now. Shut up and load faster, another snapped. We'll be long gone before anyone else shows up. I needed to slow them down, give my backup time to arrive. My eyes fell on their truck tires, and an idea formed. It was risky, but it was all I had. Keeping low, I circled around to the back of the trucks. The poachers were distracted, focused on loading their illegal haul. I pulled out my pocket knife, took a deep breath, and darted out from my cover. The first tire went down with a soft hiss. I moved to the second, then the third. I was halfway through the fourth when a shout went up. Hey, stop right there. I didn't stop. I didn't even look up. I just ran, zigzagging between the trees as bullets whizzed past me. The forest, which I knew like the back of my hand, was my only advantage now. I dove behind a large boulder, gasping for breath. The sound of pursuit was close behind, but not as close as before. They were hesitating, unsure of where I'd gone in the darkness. Come out, Ranger, one of them called. We just want to talk. Yeah, right. I'd seen what they did to elk. I didn't want to find out what they'd do to a human who'd caught them in the act. I was considering my next move when a new sound cut through the night. Sirens. My backup had arrived, and judging by the amount of noise, they'd brought the whole cavalry. The poachers' curses filled the air, followed by the sound of running feet as they scattered. I sagged against the boulder, relief washing over me. It was over. As red and blue lights flooded the area, I stepped out from my hiding place, hands raised to identify myself to my fellow officers. In moments, I was surrounded by concerned colleagues, their questions coming rapid fire. But my eyes were drawn to the trucks, where officers were already securing evidence in the poachers' ill-gotten gains. Among the items being catalogued, I saw the magnificent antlers of the elk I'd seen earlier. It hadn't died in vain. Its killers would face justice. As I was led to a waiting ambulance to be checked over, I couldn't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and triumph. The forest was safe, at least for tonight. And as for me, well, I had a feeling my next few patrols would be a lot less routine, but that was okay. After all, protecting this forest and all its inhabitants was more than just a job. It was my calling. And no matter what dangers lurked in the shadows, I'd always be ready to answer that call. The moment the lights went out, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just my apartment. The entire city had plunged into darkness. But as I fumbled for a flashlight, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to break in. In that instant, my world shrank to the space between me and my front door, and I realized that the blackout was the least of my problems. I froze, my hand still searching for the flashlight I knew was somewhere in my bedside drawer. The scratching at the lock continued, growing more insistent with each passing second. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Finally, my fingers closed around the cool metal of the flashlight. I didn't dare turn it on yet, afraid the sudden beam would alert the intruder to my presence. Instead, I clutched it to my chest like a lifeline, my mind racing to figure out what to do next. The apartment was small, a studio with barely enough room for a bed, a kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom. There weren't many places to hide, and even fewer ways to escape. The only window faced a sheer drop to the street below, 6 stories down. I was trapped. The scratching stopped, replaced by a soft click that sent ice through my veins. They were in. I heard the door swing open, the hinges creaking slightly. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, entered my home. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall beside my bed, praying that the darkness would conceal me. "I know you're in here," a voice called out, low and menacing. It was a man's voice, rough and unfamiliar. "Why don't you come out and make this easy on both of us?" I didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, he would think the apartment was empty and leave. But he didn't leave. Instead, I heard him moving around, opening drawers, rummaging through my belongings. Each sound was amplified in the darkness, my senses hyper-aware of every movement. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for him to find me. Slowly, carefully, I began to inch my way along the wall, towards the kitchenette. If I could make it there, I might be able to arm myself with a knife. My foot caught on something, probably a shoe I'd left out, and I stumbled slightly. The noise, though small, seemed to echo in the silent apartment. The intruder's movements stopped. "There you are," he said, his voice closer now. Too close. Panic surged through me. I abandoned stealth and scrambled towards the kitchen, my hands outstretched in the darkness. I heard him behind me, his footsteps quick and purposeful. My hip slammed into the edge of the counter, sending a jolt of pain through my body. But I didn't stop. My hands frantically searched the countertop, knocking over dishes in my desperation to find a weapon. Finally, my fingers closed around the handle of a knife. I spun around, brandishing it in front of me, and flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. In his hand, he held a crowbar. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound brave. "I've called the police. They'll be here any minute." He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "No, you haven't. The phones are down, sweetheart. It's just you and me." He took a step forward, and I retreated, my back pressing against the counter. The knife trembled in my grip, the flashlight beam dancing erratically across the room. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to buy time to think of a way out of this nightmare. "What does anyone want?" he replied, gesturing around the apartment. "Money, valuables, maybe a little company during this long, dark night." The implication in his words made my stomach turn. I tightened my grip on the knife, knowing I would use it if I had to. He must have seen the resolve in my eyes because his expression hardened. "Don't do anything stupid," he warned. "Just give me what I want, and I'll leave. No one has to get hurt." But I knew better. If I gave in, if I let him take control, I might not make it out of this alive. I had to fight. In one desperate move, I lunged forward, slashing with the knife. He jerked back, the blade missing him by inches. The flashlight beam wavered, plunging us momentarily into darkness. He snarled, anger replacing the false charm he'd worn before. The crowbar swung through the air, narrowly missing my head as I ducked. I felt the whoosh of it passing over me, heard it crack against the cabinets behind me. I scrambled away, trying to put distance between us. But in the darkness, I lost my orientation. I tripped over something, a chair maybe, and went sprawling to the floor. The knife clattered away, lost in the darkness. Pain shot through my knee where I'd hit the hardwood, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I could hear him coming, his breathing heavy with exertion and rage. I crawled frantically, my hands searching for anything I could use as a weapon. They closed around something solid. A book, I realized. Not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. As his footsteps drew nearer, I tensed, waiting for the right moment. When I sensed him right above me, I swung the book with all my might. It connected with a satisfying thud, and I heard him grunt in pain. Taking advantage of his momentary disorientation, I scrambled to my feet and ran. But where could I go? The front door was still open, I could make a run for it. But the hallway would be dark too, and he might catch me before I could reach the stairs. The bathroom, I decided. I could lock myself in, maybe climb out the small window if I had to. I slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, fumbling with the lock in the darkness. Just as I heard it click into place, a body slammed against the other side. "Open this door," he roared, pounding on the wood. "Open it now or I swear I'll break it down." I backed away, my eyes darting around the small space, looking for an escape route. The window was tiny, barely big enough for me to squeeze through. But it was my only option. As the pounding on the door grew more frantic, I climbed onto the toilet, reaching for the window latch. It was stiff with disuse, resistant to my trembling fingers. A loud crack split the air as the bathroom door began to splinter. I redoubled my efforts, finally managing to wrench the window open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of the city in chaos. Car alarms blared in the distance, and I could hear shouts from the streets below. The door gave way with a final, thunderous crash. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I pushed myself through the window, ignoring the scrape of the frame against my skin. For a terrifying moment, I was suspended in space, half in and half out of the window. Then I felt hands grasping at my legs, trying to pull me back in. With a final desperate push, I tumbled out of the window. My stomach lurched as I fell, certain that this was the end. But instead of plummeting 6 stories, I landed hard on a fire escape I hadn't known was there. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I didn't have time to recover. I could hear him cursing, trying to squeeze through the window after me. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pain that radiated through my body. The fire escape creaked and swayed as I descended as quickly as I dared in the darkness. When my feet finally touched solid ground, I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. I ran until the sounds of pursuit faded, until I found myself in a crowded square where emergency services were setting up in response to the blackout. As a paramedic wrapped a shock blanket around my shoulders and began to treat my injuries, The adrenaline finally began to wear off. The full weight of what had happened hit me, and I began to shake uncontrollably. But I was alive. I had faced my worst nightmare and survived. And as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting light over the darkened city, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them. Because I was stronger than I had ever known. The beam of my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the abandoned warehouse floor. I'd been a security guard at this place for years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover in the depths of this forsaken building. As I ventured deeper into the darkness, I had no idea that my routine night shift was about to turn into a fight for survival. It was just past midnight, and the warehouse was as silent as a tomb. The only sounds were the soft scuff of my boots on the concrete floor and the occasional creak of metal settling in the cool night air. I'd made this round 1,000 times before, but tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was off. I swept my flashlight across the rows of dusty shelves, its beam cutting through the gloom. Everything seemed in order, just as it had been for months. This section of the warehouse had been closed off for renovations, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen any actual work being done. As I turned to head back to my station, a sound caught my attention. It was faint, barely audible, but in the stillness of the warehouse, it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, a soft shuffling, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart began to race. We'd had problems with homeless people breaking in before, seeking shelter from the elements. But this section was supposed to be sealed off. How could anyone have gotten in? I should have called it in, should have radioed for backup. But curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was going on. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way towards the sound. It was coming from behind a stack of old crates, piled high against the far wall. As I got closer, I could hear whispered voices, urgent and low. I edged around the crates, my flashlight beam sweeping the area. What I saw made me gasp, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. There, huddled in a makeshift camp, were at least a dozen people. Men, women, even a couple of children. They squinted in the sudden light, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. "Please," one of the women said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't make us leave." I stood there, frozen in shock. This wasn't just a couple of homeless people seeking shelter for the night. This was an entire community, hidden away in the bowels of the warehouse. How long have you been here?" I managed to ask, lowering my flashlight so it wasn't shining directly in their faces. An older man, his beard gray and unkempt, spoke up. "Months, since they closed this section for renovations." He spat the word like it was poison. "We had nowhere else to go. The shelters are full. The streets aren't safe. This was our only option." I looked around, taking in their living space. They'd created a semblance of home among the crates and dusty shelves. Blankets were strung up for privacy, a small camping stove sat in one corner, and I could see a stack of books and toys for the children. My mind was reeling. How had they managed to stay hidden for so long? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? "You can't stay here," I said, hating the words even as they left my mouth. "It's not safe. If my bosses find out, we'll die out there." The woman who had first spoken interrupted. "Please, we have children." As if on cue, a small boy peeked out from behind his mother, his eyes wide with fear. My heart clenched. I knew what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to call the police, have them all removed. It was my job, after all. But as I looked at their faces, saw the desperation and hope warring in their eyes, I knew I couldn't do it. "Okay," I said, lowering my voice. "Okay. Let me think." I paced back and forth, running my hand through my hair. This was insane. If I got caught helping them, I'd lose my job for sure, maybe even face criminal charges. But if I turned them in, I'd be condemning them to a fate I couldn't even imagine. All right, I said finally, turning back to the group. Here's what we're going to do. You can stay for now, but we need to be smarter about this. Over the next hour, we worked together to better conceal their living space. We rearranged crates to create a more hidden enclosure, and I showed them the blind spots in the security cameras. I'm the only guard who patrols this section, I told them. But you need to be careful. If anyone else comes through here, you need to hide. And you can't leave any trace that you've been here during the day. They nodded eagerly, grateful for any chance to stay. As I turned to leave, the older man caught my arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to us." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked back to my station, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What had I just done? What was I going to do now? The next few weeks were a balancing act. Every night, I'd make my rounds, checking on the hidden community. I started bringing them supplies, food, blankets, even some books for the kids. It wasn't much, but their gratitude was overwhelming. But as time went on, the stress began to take its toll. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I was constantly on edge, terrified that someone would discover what I was hiding. And then, one night, my worst fears came true. I was making my usual rounds when I heard voices, and not the hushed whispers of the hidden community. These were loud, authoritative. My blood ran cold as I recognized one of them as belonging to my supervisor. "I'm telling you, Johnson, something's going on in this section. The power usage is off the charts, and I swear I heard noises the other night." I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to warn them, had to give them a chance to hide. I rounded the corner just as my supervisor and two other men came into view. They stopped short when they saw me, surprise evident on their faces. "Miller, what are you doing back here?" my supervisor asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I opened my mouth, scrambling for an explanation, when a crash echoed through the warehouse. One of the children must have knocked something over in their haste to hide. My supervisor's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" he demanded, pushing past me. "Wait," I called out, but it was too late. He was already striding towards the hidden encampment, the other men close behind. I watched in horror as they discovered the makeshift camp, as they pulled aside blankets to reveal the terrified faces of the people I'd been protecting. "What the hell is this, Miller?" my supervisor roared, turning on me. "You've been harboring squatters. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" I stood there, my mind blank. I could see the fear in the eyes of the community members, could practically feel their world crumbling around them. And then, something in me snapped. "They're not squatters," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "They're people. People who had nowhere else to go, who were failed by a system that was supposed to protect them." I stepped forward, placing myself between my supervisor and the frightened group. "You want to know why the power usage is up? Because children deserve to read at night. You want to know why you heard noises? Because people need to eat, need to live." My supervisor's face was turning an alarming shade of red, but I pressed on. "I know I've broken the rules. I know I'll probably lose my job over this. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because sometimes, being human is more important than being a good employee." A heavy silence fell over the warehouse. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see what would happen next. To my surprise, it was one of the other men who spoke first. "He's right, you know," he said quietly. "We can't just throw them out on the street." My supervisor looked from me to the huddled group and back again. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between duty and compassion. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "All right, Miller, you've made your point, but this can't continue. Not like this." Over the next few hours, we talked, really talked, about the housing crisis, about the lack of resources for the homeless, about the human cost of looking the other way. By the time the sun rose, we had the beginnings of a plan. The warehouse company would work with local charities to convert the unused section into a proper shelter. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. As I watched the first rays of sunlight stream through the dusty windows, illuminating the faces of the people I'd risked everything to protect, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would be paperwork, red tape, probably more than a few arguments. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Because sometimes, in the darkest of places, you find the light of human kindness. And once you've seen it, you can never look away again. The moment he stepped into my cab, I knew something was off. His eyes darted around nervously, and his well-tailored suit seemed at odds with the late hour in the seedy part of town we were in. But it was his destination that sent a chill down my spine, a remote location miles outside the city limits. As I pulled away from the curb, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ride was going to be anything but ordinary. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm on his knee. "Just drive north for now. I'll give you more directions as we go." I nodded, pulling out into the sparse late-night traffic. The streets were slick with recent rain, neon signs reflecting in puddles as we passed. I kept glancing in the mirror, watching my passenger. He was middle-aged, with graying hair at his temples and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the tension etched into every line. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound, the soft swish of tires on wet pavement and the occasional crackle of my dispatch radio. I thought about making small talk. It usually helped ease the tension on long rides. But something told me this man wasn't interested in chatting about the weather. As we reached the outskirts of the city, he finally spoke again. "Take the next right. Next, we're heading to an old farmhouse about 20 miles down this road." I did as he asked, turning onto a narrow two-lane highway that stretched into darkness. The streetlights had long since disappeared, leaving us illuminated only by my headlights and the dim glow of the dashboard. "Long way from home," I commented, unable to contain my curiosity any longer. He grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Sometimes home isn't where you think it is." The cryptic answer did nothing to ease my growing unease. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, hyper-aware of every pothole and curve in the road. The houses had become few and far between, replaced by vast fields and the occasional dilapidated barn. "So, what brings you out this way so late?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shifted in his seat, and I saw his hand move to the inside of his jacket. My heart rate spiked, imagining a gun or a knife. But when he withdrew his hand, he was holding only a flask. He took a long swig before answering. "Business," he said curtly. "The kind that's best conducted away from prying eyes." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. What kind of business required this level of secrecy? Nothing legal, that was for sure. I began to regret picking up this fare, but it was too late now. We were miles from anywhere, and the fare would be substantial. I needed the money too badly to turn back now. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. The silence in the cab was oppressive, broken only by the occasional static from my radio. I fiddled with it, hoping for some connection to the outside world, but we were too far out, nothing but dead air. "Turn here," my passenger said suddenly, pointing to a dirt road I would have missed if not for his direction. I slowed the cab, turning onto the rutted path. My headlights illuminated a sign, weathered and faded. "No trespassing. Private property." "You sure this is the right way?" I asked, unable to keep the nervousness from my voice. He leaned forward, his face uncomfortably close to mine. "I'm sure. Keep driving." The dirt road seemed to go on forever, winding through dense woods. Branches scraped against the sides of the cab. and more than once I winced at the sound of rocks pinging against the undercarriage. If we got stuck out here, we'd be in real trouble. Finally, the trees gave way to a clearing. In the center stood an old farmhouse, its paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. No lights were on, and there were no other cars in sight. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. "Stop here," my passenger ordered. I brought the cab to a halt, the engine idling loudly in the stillness of the night. He made no move to get out, instead leaning back in his seat and closing his eyes. Sir," I ventured after a moment. "We've arrived. That'll be 87.50. His eyes snapped open, fixing me with an intense stare. "We're not done yet. Turn off the engine and wait here." A cold knot of fear formed in my stomach. "Look, mister, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not comfortable with this. Why don't I just take you back to town and we'll call it even?" His hand disappeared into his jacket again, and this time when it emerged, it was holding a gun. My breath caught in my throat as he pointed it steadily at me. "Turn off the engine," he repeated, his voice deadly calm. "And don't even think about trying to radio for help. There's no signal out here." With shaking hands, I turned the key, plunging us into silence. The only light now came from the moon, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown yard. "Good," he said, lowering the gun slightly but not putting it away. "Now we wait." "Wait for what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. I followed his gaze, straining to see what he was looking for. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the woods. Another car was approaching, its headlights off. It pulled up beside us, and two men got out. Even in the dim light, I could see they were armed. My passenger finally opened his door, stepping out to meet them. They spoke in low voices, too quiet for me to hear. I sat frozen in my seat, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loudly. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, my passenger returned to the cab. The other car drove off, disappearing back into the woods. "Take me back to the city," he said, as casually as if we'd just stopped for a coffee. I started the engine with trembling hands, my mind racing. What had I just witnessed? A drug deal? Some kind of illegal weapons exchange? Whatever it was, I wanted no part of it. We drove back in silence, the gun now tucked away but its presence still very much felt. As we neared the city limits, he finally spoke again. "You've done well tonight," he said, his tone almost conversational. "You'll be compensated generously for your discretion." I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. When we finally pulled up in front of a nondescript apartment building, he handed me a wad of cash, far more than the fare should have been. "Remember," he said as he got out, "you saw nothing tonight. For your own sake and for your families." The threat was clear. I watched him disappear into the building, then sat there for a long moment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to go straight to the police and to report everything that had happened, but a larger part, the part that thought about my wife and kids at home, knew that I could never speak of this night to anyone. As I finally pulled away, driving towards home and trying to shake off the events of the night, I made a silent vow to myself. No more night shifts, no more picking up mysterious fares in the middle of the night. From now on, I'd stick to the day shift, to familiar routes and ordinary passengers. But even as I made this promise, I knew that the memory of this night would stay with me forever. The mysterious passenger, the farmhouse in the woods, the unspoken threat. It would all haunt my dreams for years to come. And every time I picked up a fare, I'd wonder, is this just another ride, or the beginning of another nightmare? The wolves' eyes glowed an unnatural blue in the moonlight, their snarls echoing through the forest with an otherworldly resonance. As a wildlife biologist, I'd studied these creatures for years, but nothing in my experience could explain what I was witnessing. Little did I know, my search for answers would lead me into a nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. I'd been tracking this particular pack for months, fascinated by their unusual behavior patterns. They were more coordinated than any wolves I'd ever observed, hunting with an almost military precision. At first, I'd attributed it to exceptional pack dynamics. But as time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. That night, I'd set up my observation post in a small clearing, my camera and notebook at the ready. The full moon bathed the forest in an eerie silver light, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. I'd been there for hours, my muscles stiff from sitting motionless, when I heard the first howl. It started low, almost subsonic, before rising to a pitch that set my teeth on edge. One by one, other voices joined in, creating a chorus that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the howling stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual nighttime sounds of the forest, the rustle of small animals, the hoot of owls, had fallen silent. It was as if the entire wood was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when I saw them. The pack emerged from the shadows like wraiths, their movements fluid and synchronized in a way that sent chills down my spine. But it wasn't their movements that made my blood run cold. It was their eyes. Wolves. Eyes typically glow yellow or green in the dark, a result of the reflective layer behind their retinas. But these blazed an electric blue, pulsing with an inner light that seemed almost mechanical. I raised my camera with shaking hands, desperate to document what I was seeing. But as I peered through the viewfinder, I saw something that made me forget all about taking pictures. Behind the wolves, partially obscured by the trees, stood a figure, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions subtly off in a way that made my mind recoil. And it was looking directly at me. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to gather my equipment, no longer caring about stealth. I had to get out of there, had to warn someone about what I'd seen. But as I turned to flee, I found my path blocked by one of the wolves. Up close, the wrongness of the creature was even more apparent. Its fur was matted and patchy, with what looked like metal gleaming beneath in places, and those eyes. God, those eyes. Looking into them was like staring into an abyss of cold, alien intelligence. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. The wolf matched me step for step, herding me back towards the clearing, towards the figure. As I stumbled backward, I felt something snag my ankle. I went down hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. Gasping, I looked down to see what had tripped me. It was a root, but no root I'd ever seen before. It pulsed with the same blue light as the wolf's eyes, and as I watched in horror, it began to move, winding its way up my leg. I thrashed wildly, trying to free myself, but the root only tightened its grip. More tendrils emerged from the ground, wrapping around my arms and torso. I was being pulled into the earth, the taste of damp soil filling my mouth as I screamed. Just as I thought it was over, that I would be swallowed by the forest floor, everything stopped. The roots loosened their hold, retreating back into the ground. I lay there, panting and shaking, too terrified to move. A shadow fell over me. I looked up to see the figure looming above, its form seeming to shift and waver in the moonlight. It reached out a hand too long, fingers tapering to points that looked wickedly sharp. What are you?" I managed to croak out. The figure tilted its head, the movement unnaturally smooth. When it spoke, its voice was like rustling leaves and creaking branches, with an underlying hum that made my teeth ache. "We are the forest," it said. "We are the wolves. We are the balance that you humans have forgotten." I shook my head, trying to make sense of its words. "I don't understand." The figure crouched down, bringing its face level with mine. I could see now that what I had taken for a face was more like a mask, carved from bark and lit from within by that eerie blue glow. "Your kind has forgotten the old ways," it continued. "You take and take, never giving back. You've upset the balance. We are here to restore it." As it spoke, more figures emerged from the trees. Some looked human-like, others were more animal in form, and still others defied description altogether. They formed a circle around us, their eyes all glowing with that same unnatural light. "The wolves," I said, a horrible realization dawning. "You've changed them somehow." The figure nodded. "They are our avatars. Through them, we watch. Through them, we act. And soon, through them, we will reclaim what was taken." I thought of the strange behavior I'd observed in the pack, the coordinated hunting, the unnatural intelligence in their eyes. It all made a twisted kind of sense now. "What are you going to do?" I asked, dreading the answer. The figure stood towering over me once more. "We will remind humanity of its place in the natural order, and you, little scientist, I will help us." Before I could protest, the figure placed a hand on my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and I felt something alien pushing its way into my mind. Images flashed through my consciousness, ancient forests, rituals performed in moonlit clearings, wolves running through time immemorial, and beneath it all, a pulsing blue light, calling to me, trying to subsume my will. I fought against it with everything I had, clinging desperately to my sense of self, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Bit by bit, I felt myself slipping away, being replaced by something other. Just when I thought all was lost, when I was on the verge of surrendering to the alien presence in my mind, a sound cut through the night. A helicopter, its searchlight sweeping the trees. The figures around me hissed and retreated, melting back into the shadows. The one touching me jerked its hand away as if burned. In that moment of distraction, I found the strength to push back against the invading presence in my mind, forcing it out with a mental scream. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about the direction, just needing to get away. Branches whipped at my face. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I kept going. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, and suddenly I burst out of the tree line into a small meadow. The searchlight found me, momentarily blinding me. I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help. As the helicopter descended, I chanced to look back at the forest. There, at the edge of the trees, I saw the glowing eyes of the wolves, watching me, and behind them, barely visible, the shifting forms of the forest entities. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was airlifted to a nearby hospital, treated for exposure and mild dehydration. I tried to tell the doctors and the park rangers what I'd seen, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. They nodded politely, clearly humoring me, probably thinking I'd hallucinated the whole thing due to exhaustion or exposure to some toxin. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. And as I sit here in my hospital room, watching the sun rise over the distant tree line, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The forest is awake now, aware in a way it hasn't been for millennia. And it's angry. I don't know what the future holds, or what role I'm supposed to play in the events to come. But I do know one thing. I'll never look at the wilderness the same way again. Because now I know that sometimes, when you stare into the forest stares back, and it has plans of its own. The neon sign flickered outside, casting an eerie glow through the grimy windows of the convenience store. It was 2 a.m. tour, and I'd been staring at that car for hours, just sitting there, engine idling. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't make out the driver. Something wasn't right. And as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find out exactly what that something was. I'd been working the graveyard shift at this 24-hour convenience store for about 6 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most nights were uneventful, restocking shelves, mopping floors, and ringing up the occasional insomniac or trucker passing through. But tonight was different. The car had pulled up around 11 p.m. A sleek black sedan that looked out of place in this rundown neighborhood. At first, I thought maybe the driver was lost or having car trouble. But as the hours ticked by and the car remained, my unease grew. I tried to distract myself with busy work, but my eyes kept drifting back to that car. The rain that had been threatening all night finally started, a steady drizzle that blurred the outlines of the vehicle and made the whole scene feel even more surreal. Around 1:30 a.m., I decided to step outside for a closer look. I told myself I was just going to check the trash cans, but really, I wanted to see if I could get a glimpse of who was inside that car. The cool night air hit me as I stepped out, a welcome relief from the stuffy store. I made a show of adjusting the trash can lids, all the while stealing glances at the sedan. The windows were so dark, it was like looking into a black hole. But as I turned to head back inside, I caught a flash of movement. Someone was definitely in there. Back behind the counter, I debated calling the cops, but what would I tell them? That a car had been parked outside my store for a few hours. They'd probably laugh it off. No, I decided to wait it out. My shift ended at 6 a.m. Surely the car would be gone by then. But at 2:30 a.m., everything changed. The car door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from a distance, I could tell he was agitated. He paced back and forth beside the car, running his hands through his hair and muttering to himself. Then, abruptly, he turned and headed straight for the store. My heart began to race. I'd seen my fair share of strange customers, but something about this guy set off every alarm bell in my head. As he got closer, I could see his eyes were wild, darting around frantically. His clothes were rumpled like he'd been wearing them for days, and there was a faint tremor in his hands. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet store. He stood just inside the doorway for a moment, scanning the aisles before his gaze settled on me. "Good evening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't respond right away, just stared at me with those unsettling eyes. Then, slowly, he began to approach the counter. "You ever feel like you're being watched?" he asked, his voice low and intense. I swallowed hard, not sure how to respond. I guess sometimes. Nature of the job, you know." He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of stale sweat and something else I couldn't quite place. "No, not like that. I mean really watched. Like there are eyes everywhere, following your every move." I took an involuntary step back. "Look, man, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone for you?" He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that made me flinch. "Call someone? Who would you call? They're all in on it, you know. Every last one of them." My hand inched towards the panic button under the counter. We'd never had to use it before, but right now I was seriously considering it. "Why don't you tell me what's going on?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maybe I can help." His eyes narrowed. "Help? You want to help me?" He reached into his jacket, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to pull out a gun. Instead, he produced a crumpled piece of paper. He smoothed it out on the counter, revealing a mess of scribbled notes and diagrams. "Look," he said, jabbing his finger at the paper. "It's all connected. The government, the corporations, even the damn weather. They're controlling everything, manipulating us like puppets." I nodded slowly, not taking my eyes off him. "That must be scary," I said cautiously. "Scary?" he repeated, his voice rising. "It's terrifying. Do you have any idea what they're capable of? What they'll do to keep their secrets?" He was practically shouting now, his face flushed and spittle flying from his mouth. I glanced towards the door, praying for another customer to walk in, but the street outside remained deserted. "Sir," I said, trying to keep my voice firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. You're scaring me." For a moment, he looked taken aback, as if he'd forgotten where he was. Then his expression hardened. "Scaring you? You should be scared. We should all be scared. They could be listening right now." He began to pace up and down in front of the counter, muttering to himself. I watched him warily, my hand hovering near the panic button. Part of me wanted to press it, to call for help. But another part was afraid of what he might do if he realized I was trying to alert someone. Suddenly, he stopped pacing and turned to face me. "I need supplies," he said abruptly. "Food, water, batteries. Enough to last for weeks." I nodded, relieved to have something normal to focus on. "Sure, I can help you with that. Why don't you grab a basket and I'll show you where everything is." As we moved through the aisles, filling his basket with canned goods and bottled water, he continued to ramble about conspiracies and hidden agendas. I made non-committal noises, trying to keep him calm while also looking for an opportunity to get back behind the counter. Finally, with his basket full, we returned to the register. As I began to ring up his items, he leaned in close again. "You seem like a good kid," he said, his voice low. "You should get out while you still can. Find somewhere safe and off the grid. They haven't gotten to you yet." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My hands shook as I bagged his groceries, acutely aware of how close he was standing. "That'll be $78.50, I said, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. He pulled out a wad of crumpled bills, peeling off several and handing them to me. As I counted out his change, I noticed his hands were shaking too. "Keep it," he said as I held out the coins. "You might need it more than me soon." With that cryptic statement, he gathered up his bags and headed for the door. I watched him go, my heart still racing. As he reached his car, he turned back to look at the store. For a moment, our eyes met through the window, and I saw something in his gaze that I couldn't quite define. Fear, maybe, or desperation. Then he was gone, the car pulling away with a screech of tires. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty parking lot, trying to process what had just happened. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every time the door opened, I tensed, half expecting to see him return. But it was just the usual early morning crowd. Shift workers grabbing coffee, delivery drivers restocking their routes. As 6 a.m. approached and my replacement arrived, I debated whether to mention the strange encounter. In the light of day, it all seemed a bit surreal. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a troubled guy having a bad night. But as I stepped out into the cool morning air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The world looked the same, but it felt different somehow. As if a veil had been lifted and I was seeing things I hadn't noticed before. I walked home slowly, my mind replaying the night's events. The man's words echoed in my head. "They haven't gotten to you yet." I shook my head, trying to clear away the paranoid thoughts. It was just the ramblings of a disturbed individual, nothing more. But as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a black sedan lurking in the shadows. That night marked a turning point for me. I quit the convenience store job soon after, telling myself it was just time for a change. But deep down, I knew the real reason. Every time I worked the late shift, I found myself watching the parking lot, tense and on edge, waiting for that car to return. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I still catch myself wondering, what if he was right? What if there really is something out there, watching, waiting? And what do you do when the paranoia starts to make a twisted kind of sense? The scream echoed through the abandoned wing of the psychiatric hospital, chilling me to the bone. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling as I swept it across the decrepit hallway. As a night shift nurse, I'd heard my fair share of unsettling noises, but this was different. Little did I know, investigating that sound would plunge me into a nightmare I never could have imagined. I'd been working at Oakwood Psychiatric for 3 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. The night shift was usually quiet, just routine checks and medication rounds. But lately, there had been whispers among the staff about strange occurrences in the old wing. Shadows moving where they shouldn't, unexplained noises, equipment going haywire. Management had brushed off the concerns, attributing them to an old building settling and overactive imaginations. But that night, as I stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding in my chest, I knew this was no figment of imagination. The scream came again, fainter this time, but unmistakably human. It was coming from the abandoned wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed off for renovation months ago. No one was supposed to be in there. I should have called for backup, should have alerted security, but something compelled me to investigate on my own. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe a misguided sense of duty. Whatever it was, I found myself moving towards the sealed-off entrance to the old wing. The door was heavy, its hinges creaking in protest as I pushed it open. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the scent of dust and decay. I swept my flashlight beam across the corridor, revealing peeling wallpaper and abandoned medical equipment covered in sheets. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone there?" No response, just the unsettling silence of a place long abandoned. I took a tentative step forward, then another. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I winced at each sound, feeling like an intruder in a forgotten world. As I moved deeper into the wing, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew colder, and I could have sworn I felt a breeze, despite there being no open windows. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening, and I silently cursed myself for not checking the batteries before starting my shift. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A soft whimper, coming from one of the rooms down the hall. My heart raced as I approached the partially open door. I pushed it gently, wincing at the creak of rusted hinges. "Hello," I called again, softer this time. "I'm a nurse. I'm here to help." At first, I saw nothing in the dim light of my failing flashlight. Then, movement in the corner caught my eye. A figure, huddled and shaking, pressed against the wall. I approached slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "It's okay," I said soothingly. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" The figure lifted its head, and I had to stifle a gasp. It was a man, but his appearance was shocking. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt, his eyes, wide and feverish, darted around the room before settling on me. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. I froze. That wasn't my name, but something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. "No, I'm not Sarah," I said gently. "My name is Emily. I'm a nurse here. Can you tell me who you are and how you got here?" He shook his head violently. No. You're Sarah. You have to be Sarah. She said you'd come back for me." I took a step closer, my mind racing. This man was clearly confused, possibly delusional. But how had he gotten into this sealed-off wing? And how long had he been here? "Who said I'd come back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The doctor," he whispered, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if expecting someone to materialize from the shadows. "She said if I waited, you'd come back. But you never did. Why didn't you come back, Sarah?" A cold knot formed in my stomach. There was something familiar about this man, something I couldn't quite place. I racked my brain, trying to remember if I'd seen him before. And then it hit me. The missing patient. 6 months ago, right before the old wing was closed for renovations, a patient had disappeared without a trace. The police had investigated, but no leads were ever found. Eventually, it was assumed he had somehow escaped and was living on the streets. But he hadn't escaped. He'd been here all along. "John," I said, remembering his name from the missing persons report. "John Miller." His eyes widened at the sound of his name. "You do remember me," he exclaimed, a manic grin spreading across his face. "I knew you'd come back, Sarah. I knew you wouldn't leave me here forever." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "John, I'm not Sarah, but I want to help you. We need to get you out of here. Get you checked out by a doctor." His smile faltered. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, I can't leave. She said I have to stay here. She said it's not safe out there. Who said that, John? I asked, though I was beginning to fear I knew the answer. The doctor, he whispered. Dr. Ellison. My blood ran cold. Dr. Ellison had been the head psychiatrist of this wing before it was shut down. She had retired shortly after John's disappearance. John, I said carefully, Dr. Ellison isn't here anymore. She retired months ago. Whatever she told you, it's not true. It's not safe for you to stay here. He looked at me, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. But she comes to see me every night. She brings me food, tells me stories about the outside world, about how dangerous it is out there. I felt sick. Had Dr. Ellison been keeping this man here all this time? But why? And how had no one noticed? I held up my hand. John, please, come with me. I promise I'll keep you safe. He hesitated, then slowly reached out. His hand was cold and trembling as it grasped mine. I helped him to his feet, noticing how thin and weak he seemed. We had just reached the door when a voice rang out behind us, stopping me in my tracks. And where do you think you're going? I turned, my heart pounding. There, standing in the shadows, was Dr. Ellison. She looked different from how I remembered. Her hair was wild, her eyes had a manic gleam, and her once pristine lab coat was stained and tattered. Dr. Ellison, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What's going on here? Why is John still here? She laughed, a high, unhinged sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Oh, you wouldn't understand. None of you ever understood. John is special. He sees the truth about this world. He knows what's really out there. I felt John's grip on my hand tighten. He was trembling, whether from fear or excitement, I couldn't tell. How, whatever you think you're doing, it's over, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'm taking John out of here. He needs help. Dr. Ellison's face darkened. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, she said, reaching into her pocket. The glint of metal made my heart stop. A scalpel. John needs to stay here, where it's safe, she continued, her voice taking on a soothing, almost hypnotic quality. And now that you've seen, you'll have to stay too. Don't worry, you'll understand soon enough. You'll see the truth, just like John does. She took a step forward, scalpel raised. I backed away, pulling John with me. My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. And then, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't realized I'd made, I heard voices in the hallway. The security guard, making his rounds. Help, I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls. We're in here, help us. Dr. Ellison's eyes widened in panic. She lunged forward, but I was faster. I slammed the door shut, holding it closed with all my strength as she pounded on the other side. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, and suddenly there were other voices, other hands pulling us away from the door. In the chaos that followed, security subduing Dr. Ellison, paramedics checking on John, police asking questions. I felt like I was in a daze as I watched John being gently led away. His eyes met mine one last time. There was fear there, yes, but also a glimmer of something else. Hope, maybe, or the first spark of a return to reality. I don't know what will happen now. There will be investigations, questions, probably lawsuits. But as I sit here, giving my statement to the police, I can't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering unease. Because now I know that sometimes the real monsters aren't the patients we're meant to fear. Sometimes they're the ones we're supposed to trust. And in a place like Oakwood, where the line between sanity and madness is often blurred, who's to say which side any of us are really on? The first time I noticed him, I dismissed it as coincidence. The second time I told myself I was being paranoid. But by the third night, as I saw the same shadowy figure trailing behind me on my usual dog-walking route, I knew with chilling certainty that I was being stalked. What I didn't know was how this silent game of cat and mouse would escalate into a nightmare that would force me to confront my deepest fears. It had started as a simple routine. Every night at 10 p.m., I'd take Max, my golden retriever, for a walk around the neighborhood. It was a quiet suburb, all manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses, the kind of place where nothing ever happened, or so I thought. The route was always the same. Down Maple Street, left on Oak, loop around the park, and back home via Elm. It was a peaceful time, just me and Max under the streetlights, the rest of the world asleep. The first night I saw him, it was just a glimpse, a figure at the far end of the street, walking in the opposite direction. I barely registered it at the time, just another night owl out for a stroll. The second night, I saw him again, same place, same time. A coincidence, I told myself. Maybe he worked nights and this was his way of unwinding after a shift. But on the third night, when I saw him turn onto Oak Street just as Max and I rounded the corner, a tendril of unease began to curl in my stomach. I picked up my pace and tugging Max along. When I glanced back, the figure was still there, matching my speed. My heart began to race. I fumbled for my phone, cursing under my breath when I realized I'd left it at home charging. Stupid, stupid, stupid. How many times had I read about the importance of carrying your phone for safety? I was nearing the park now, the streetlights fewer and farther between. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and every shadow looked like a potential threat. Max, usually so calm, must have sensed my fear. He whined softly, looking up at me with concerned eyes. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, more to reassure myself than him. "We're almost home." I chanced another look behind me. The figure was closer now, close enough that I could make out some details. A man, tall and lean, dressed all in black. His face was hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap. Panic surged through me. I abandoned all pretense of calm and broke into a run. Max, startled by the sudden change, barked and ran alongside me. The sound echoed off the silent houses, but no lights came on. No one came to investigate. I could hear footsteps behind me now, quick and purposeful. He was running too, chasing me. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I veered off my usual route, cutting through someone's backyard in a desperate attempt to lose him. Max bounded ahead, leaping over a low fence. I scrambled after him, my jeans catching on the wood and tearing. I emerged onto an unfamiliar street, gasping for breath. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. But then I heard it. Footsteps, slower now but steady. He was still coming. I ran again, no longer caring about the direction, just needing to get away. Houses blurred past, all looking the same in the darkness. I was lost. I realized with growing horror, lost in my own neighborhood. A stitch was forming in my side and my lungs burned with each breath. I couldn't keep this up much longer. I needed help, needed to find somewhere safe. And then I saw it. A house with lights on. Someone was awake. Without hesitation, I sprinted up the driveway and pounded on the door. "Help!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with fear. "Please, someone help me." Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I could hear the footsteps getting closer. Max growled, positioning himself between me and the street. Just as I was about to give up hope, the porch light flicked on. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman in a bathrobe, her eyes wide with concern. "Please," I gasped. "There's someone chasing me. Can I come in?" She hesitated for just a moment before stepping aside. I rushed in, pulling Max with me, and she quickly closed and locked the door behind us. "What's going on?" she asked, reaching for her phone. "Should I call the police?" I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. As she dialed, I peered out the window, searching for any sign of my pursuer. The street outside was empty and still. The next hour passed in a blur. The police arrived, took my statement, and searched the area. They found no sign of the man I'd described. No evidence that anyone had been chasing me at all. "Are you sure you saw someone?" one of the officers asked, his tone skeptical. It was dark after all. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks on you. I wanted to scream in frustration. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, but doubt began to creep in. Had I overreacted? Imagined the whole thing? The kind woman who'd let me in, Susan, she'd introduced herself as, offered to let me stay the night. But I declined, suddenly desperate to be home, to be somewhere familiar. The police gave me a ride back to my house, checking inside before leaving me with a card and instructions to call if I saw anything suspicious. As their car pulled away, I locked the door behind me, double-checking every window. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat on the couch, Max's head in my lap, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, I felt wrung out, exhausted in body and spirit. I called in sick to work, unable to face the outside world just yet. As the day wore on, I began to convince myself that I had overreacted. The stress of work, the darkness of night, it had all combined to make me see threats where there were none. But as evening approached, bringing with it the time for Max's walk, I felt the fear returning. The thought of stepping outside, of retracing those same streets, made my palms sweat and my heart race. For the first time in years, I skipped Max's walk. He whined at the door, confused by the break-in routine, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the safety of the house. Instead, I let him out in the backyard, watching him like a hawk from the kitchen window. The next night was the same, and the next. Max grew restless, and I felt guilty, but the fear was paralyzing. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed a little time to get over the scare. A week passed. Then 2. I'd taken to working from home, ordering groceries for delivery. The only time I left the house was to let Max out in the yard, and even then, I was constantly on alert, scanning the fence line for any sign of movement. Friends called, wondering why I'd gone off the grid. I made excuses, a flu, a family emergency, anything to avoid admitting the truth, that I'd become a prisoner in my own home, held captive by fear of a threat I couldn't even be sure was real. It was Max who finally forced me to confront my fear. 3 weeks after that terrifying night, he refused to go out in the backyard. He sat by the front door whining pitifully, his leash in his mouth. Those soulful brown eyes looked up at me, filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, for what felt like hours. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I couldn't let Max down. I couldn't let this unnamed, unseen threat control my life any longer. With a deep breath, I opened the door. The cool evening air hit my face, and for a moment, I almost retreated back inside. But Max's excited bark spurred me on, one step, then another. Before I knew it, we were at the end of the driveway. I looked up and down the street, half expecting to see that shadowy figure. But there was nothing. Just quiet houses and empty sidewalks. Slowly, hesitantly, we began our old route. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car engine made me tense. But as we walked, as nothing jumped out at us from the shadows, I began to relax. The familiar sights and sounds of the neighborhood, once a source of comfort, began to work their magic again. We were nearing the park when I saw him. A man, tall and lean, dressed in black, walking towards us. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, the old fear rushing back. But as he got closer, I realized something. He wasn't the same man. This was Mr. Johnson from 3 doors down, out for his own evening constitutional. He waved as he passed, and I managed a weak smile in return. As Max and I completed our loop and headed home, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced it, stepped out into the night despite it, and survived. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be other nights when the shadows seemed to move, when every sound would set my heart racing. But I also knew that I couldn't let fear win. I couldn't let one night of terror dictate the rest of my life. As I unlocked my front door, Max wagging happily beside me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would be cautious, yes, but I would also be brave. I would reclaim my life, my routine, my peace of mind, one step at a time, one walk at a time, until the night held no more terror for me than the day. After all, the greatest victory isn't never being afraid. It's being afraid and moving forward anyway. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, I had taken that first, crucial step forward. The pounding on my cabin door jolted me awake, my heart racing as lightning illuminated the room in brief, terrifying flashes. I never expected anyone to brave this storm, let alone come knocking in the dead of night. As I cautiously approached the door, I had no idea that opening it would plunge me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about trust and survival. I'd come to this remote cabin in the mountains to escape the chaos of city life, to find some peace and quiet. The irony wasn't lost on me as another crash of thunder shook the windows. I'd been here for a week, and this was the first real storm I'd seen. It was a doozy. Rain lashing against the roof like it was trying to tear the place apart. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. "Hello," a voice called out, barely audible over the howling wind. "Please, is anyone there? I need help." I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. But I couldn't just leave someone out there in this weather, could I? Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. A woman stood there, drenched to the bone and shivering violently. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were wide with fear and desperation. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, her teeth chattering. I thought no one was here." "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. You must be freezing." She stumbled inside, and I quickly closed the door against the howling wind. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd first thought, probably in her mid-20s. Her clothes were torn and muddy, and there was a nasty-looking scratch on her cheek. "Thank you," she said, hugging herself tightly. I didn't think anyone would be out here. I was starting to lose hope. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What happened? How did you end up out there in this storm?" She clutched the blanket tightly, her eyes darting around the cabin as if searching for hidden dangers. It's a long story. I'm not even sure where to begin." "Why don't we start with your name?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Sarah," she said after a moment's hesitation. "My name is Sarah." "I'm Mike," I replied. "Look, Sarah, you're safe here. Why don't you sit down and I'll make you some tea? Then you can tell me what happened." She nodded gratefully and sank onto the couch while I busied myself in the small kitchenette. As I waited for the water to boil, I couldn't help but steal glances at her. She seemed on edge, jumping at every crack of thunder. When I handed her the steaming mug of tea, she wrapped her hands around it like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," she murmured. "You have no idea how grateful I am." I sat in the armchair across from her, giving her some space. "So, Sarah, what brings you out to the middle of nowhere on a night like this?" She took a sip of tea, wincing slightly as the hot liquid touched her lips. I was running away," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Running away from what?" I asked, leaning forward. Sarah's eyes met mine, and I saw a depth of fear there that made my blood run cold. From someone who wants to hurt me, someone dangerous. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Do we need to call the police?" She shook her head violently. No police. They can't help. They might even be working with him." Alarm bells were starting to ring in my head. This was sounding more and more like something I didn't want to be involved in. But I couldn't just throw her back out into the storm. "Who's after you, Sarah?" I asked gently. She set down her mug, her hands shaking. "My ex-boyfriend. He's not who I thought he was. I found out he's involved in some really bad things. Illegal things. When I confronted him about it, She trailed off, her hand unconsciously touching the scratch on her cheek. I felt a surge of anger. "He hurt you?" Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I managed to get away, but he's been chasing me. I've been on the run for days. I thought I'd lost him. But then I saw his car on the road leading up here. I panicked and ran into the woods. That's when the storm hit." My mind was racing. If what she was saying was true, we could both be in danger. "Do you think he knows you're here?" "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't think so, but he's always been good at finding me." I stood up, moving to the window. The storm was still raging outside, making it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the porch. If someone was out there, we'd never know until it was too late. "We should be safe here for the night," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The storm's too bad for anyone to be searching. In the morning, we can figure out our next move." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Mike. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." I gave her a reassuring smile. "Try to get some rest. You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here and keep watch, just in case." She looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion won out. I showed her to the small bedroom, gave her some dry clothes to change into, and then settled in for a long night. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, every creak of the cabin in the wind, had me on edge. I kept replaying Sarah's story in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to believe her completely, to be the hero who saves the damsel in distress. But another part, a more cautious part, whispered doubts. As the night wore on and the storm began to subside, those doubts grew louder. There were inconsistencies in her story that I couldn't ignore. The scratch on her cheek looked older than a few days, and if she had been running through the woods, why weren't her shoes muddy? Around dawn, I heard movement from the bedroom. Sarah emerged, looking more put together than someone who had spent days on the run should. "Morning," she said, giving me a small smile. "Any sign of anyone?" I shook my head. "All quiet. The storm's passed. We should be able to head into town soon. Get you some help." A flicker of something, panic, crossed her face. "I don't think that's a good idea. He might be watching the roads." "Sarah," I said carefully, "I think it's time you told me the whole truth. Who are you really running from?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the mask slip. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "You're smarter than you look," she said, her voice losing its tremor. "Most men are too busy playing the hero to ask questions." I tensed, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were. "What's really going on here?" Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "The truth, I'm not running from anyone. I'm hiding something valuable, and I needed a place to lay low until the heat dies down." My mind reeled. "So everything you told me last night was a lie?" "Not everything," she said with a shrug. "My ex-boyfriend is looking for me, but he's not the dangerous one in this scenario." I heard a car engine in the distance, growing closer. Sarah's head snapped towards the sound, a grin spreading across her face. "That'll be my ride," she said. "Thanks for the hospitality, Mike. You've been a real lifesaver." Before I could react, she was out the door, sprinting towards a black SUV that had just pulled up. I watched in stunned silence as she jumped in, and the vehicle sped away, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. As I stood there on the porch, the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, I realized how close I'd come to being pulled into something far more dangerous than a storm. I'd opened my door to a stranger, offered help without question, and nearly paid the price for my trust. I never found out what Sarah was really hiding, or who she was running from. But that night taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers that can lurk behind a friendly face, and a plea for help. In the wilderness, it's not always the elements you need to fear most. Sometimes the real danger comes in human form. The flickering monitor was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. As an IT technician working late, I was used to dealing with computer glitches, but the strange network activity coming from an abandoned floor of our office building sent chills down my spine. Little did I know, my curiosity would lead me into a web of danger that would test the limits of my courage and tech skills. It was well past midnight, and the office was eerily quiet. Most of my colleagues had long since gone home, leaving me alone with the soft hum of servers and the glow of computer screens. I'd stayed late to run some system updates, a tedious but necessary task that was best done when network traffic was low. That's when I noticed it, an unusual spike in data transfer on our network monitoring dashboard. At first, I thought it might be a glitch in the system, but as I dug deeper, I realized the traffic was coming from the 14th floor, a floor that had been vacant for months, awaiting renovations. My first instinct was to call security, but something held me back. Maybe it was professional curiosity, or perhaps a misguided sense of responsibility. Whatever the reason, I decided to investigate myself. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual, each floor ticking by slowly as my heart rate increased. When the doors finally opened, I was greeted by darkness. The emergency exit signs cast an eerie red glow, barely illuminating the abandoned office space. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight app. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing dust-covered desks and chairs draped in plastic sheeting. It looked like a ghost town frozen in time. As I moved deeper into the floor, I strained my ears for any sound. At first, there was nothing but the faint hum of the building's HVAC system. But then I heard it, a soft whirring noise, like multiple computers running simultaneously. Following the sound, I found myself in front of a conference room. Light seeped out from under the door, a stark contrast to the darkness surrounding it. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Every instinct told me to turn back, to call security, and let them handle this. But curiosity won out. I pushed the door open slowly, and what I saw inside made my jaw drop. The conference table had been pushed aside, replaced by rows of sleek, high-powered computers. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting to a central hub. The screens flickered with lines of code I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the equipment that shocked me the most. It was the people. 3 individuals, hunched over keyboards, their faces illuminated by the glow of their monitors. They were so engrossed in their work that they didn't notice me at first. Then, one of them looked up. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. I saw surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by something darker. Anger, maybe, or fear. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, standing up abruptly. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I'm from IT, I managed to stammer out. We detected some unusual network activity. The other 2 had turned to face me now. One, a woman with short, spiky hair, cursed under her breath. The third, a man with a beard and thick-rimmed glasses, remained silent, his eyes darting between me and his colleagues. "You shouldn't be here," the first man said, his voice low and threatening. He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed up. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what's going on here, but you can't just set up an unauthorized network like this. It's a serious security breach." The woman laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Oh, honey," she said. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Were they corporate spies, hackers, some kind of cyber terrorists? Whatever they were, I knew I was in way over my head. "I'm just going to go," I said, edging towards the door. "I won't say anything about this, I promise." The bearded man spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft. "I'm afraid we can't let you do that." My heart sank. I knew then that this wasn't going to end well. I turned to run, but the first man was quicker. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Let go of me," I yelled, struggling to break free. "Shut him up," the woman hissed. "Someone might hear." I opened my mouth to scream, but a hand clamped over it, muffling my cries. I was dragged back into the room, the door slamming shut behind us. "What do we do with him?" the bearded man asked, his calm demeanor at odds with the situation. The first man, still holding me tightly, growled, "We can't let him go. He's seen too much." Fear coursed through me. Were they going to kill me? Over what? Some computers and code I didn't even understand. The woman approached me, her eyes narrowed. "Maybe we can use him," she mused. "He's it, after all. He might be useful." I shook my head frantically, trying to convey that I wanted no part in whatever they were doing. "It's too risky," the first man argued. "We should just get rid of him and move our operation." The bearded man sighed. "Let's at least find out what he knows first." He nodded to the man holding me, who reluctantly removed his hand from my mouth. I gasped for air, my mind whirling. I needed to say something, anything, to convince them not to hurt me. "Look," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't know what you're doing here, and I don't want to know. Just let me go, and I swear I won't tell anyone about this." The woman laughed again. "And why should we believe you?" I swallowed hard. Because I could have called security as soon as I saw the network activity. But I didn't. I came to investigate myself. I was curious, that's all. The three exchanged glances. I could see them weighing their options. "He has a point," the bearded man said slowly. "If he wanted to turn us in, he's had ample opportunity." The first man grunted, his grip on my arm loosening slightly. "So what? We just let him walk out of here?" "Not quite," the woman said, a calculating look in her eyes. "I have an idea." She turned to me. "Here's the deal. You're going to help us. We need someone on the inside. Someone who can keep the rest of IT off our backs. You do that, and we let you live. Simple as that." My mind reeled. They wanted me to be their accomplice, to betray my company, my colleagues. And if I refuse, I asked, already knowing the answer. The first man's grip tightened again. "Then we have a problem," he growled. I closed my eyes, trying to think. I was trapped, outnumbered, and out of my depth. Whatever these people were involved in, it was big, dangerous. But did I have a choice? "Okay," I said finally. Opening my eyes, "Okay, I'll do it. But I want to know what I'm getting into. What exactly are you doing here?" The woman smirked. "Let's just say we're redistributing some wealth, evening the playing field a bit." "Hackers, then?" "Not just any hackers, but ones targeting our company." The implications were staggering. "And now," the bearded man said, his voice still eerily calm, "you're one of us." As the gravity of my situation sank in, I realized my life would never be the same. I was now part of something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have imagined. Every day would be a balancing act, protecting their secret operation while trying to find a way out of this nightmare. As they began to explain my role in their scheme, I couldn't help but wonder, how had a routine late-night IT check turned into this? And more importantly, how was I going to get out of it alive? The computers hummed around us, lines of code still scrolling across the screens. In that moment, I knew that my greatest challenge wasn't just staying alive. It was keeping my soul intact in a world where every keystroke could mean the difference between freedom and imprisonment, between life and death. Welcome to the dark side of IT, where the real viruses aren't in the computers, but in the hearts of those who use them. And I was now infected, whether I liked it or not. The first thing I noticed about the group was their eyes. Wild, zealous, and filled with a fervor that sent chills down my spine. As a park ranger, I'd stumbled upon my fair share of odd campers, but these people were different. They moved with purpose. their actions synchronized as if choreographed by an unseen hand. Little did I know, my discovery of this isolated community would plunge me into a nightmare that would test the limits of my survival skills and sanity. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I'd been a ranger in this park for over a decade, and I thought I knew every inch of it. But as I hiked through a particularly dense section of forest, I noticed something odd. A faint trail that didn't appear on any of my maps. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow it, thinking perhaps it was an animal path I'd somehow missed all these years. The trail wound deeper into the woods, becoming more defined as I went. After about a mile, I started to hear sounds, voices, the clang of metal, the hum of machinery. All things that shouldn't exist this far into protected wilderness. I slowed my pace, moving as quietly as possible. The forest opened up into a large clearing, and what I saw there made me doubt my own eyes. It was a compound, hidden so perfectly in the natural contours of the land that it was nearly invisible until you were right on top of it. Crude buildings made of salvaged materials dotted the clearing. People moved between them with purpose, carrying supplies, tending to gardens, and was that weapons training? I ducked behind a large tree, my heart pounding. This was way beyond anything I'd ever encountered before. As I watched, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, a group emerged from the largest building. They were led by a tall man with a wild beard and piercing blue eyes. Even from a distance, I could feel the authority he exuded. The others deferred to him, hanging on his every word. I strained to hear what they were saying, but they were too far away. Their body language, however, told a story of its own. There was an intensity to their interactions, a sense of urgency that set my nerves on edge. I knew I should leave, report what I'd found to my superiors, but something held me there, a mix of fascination and dread. I had to know more. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the compound came alive with activity. Fires were lit, casting long shadows across the clearing. The group gathered around the largest fire, and the bearded man began to speak. His voice carried on the night air, filled with passion and conviction. "Brothers and sisters," he intoned, "the time is drawing near. The signs are all around us. The world outside these woods is crumbling, but we will survive. We will thrive. And when the dust settles, we will emerge to rebuild society as it should be." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some off-the-grid community. This was something far more dangerous. I began to back away slowly, intent on making my escape. But in my haste, I stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. Every head in the clearing turned in my direction. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, chaos erupted. "Intruder," someone shouted. "Secure the perimeter." I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. My ranger training kicked in. I knew these woods better than they did, and I used every trick I knew to throw them off my trail. I crossed streams, doubled back on my own tracks, and used the dense foliage to my advantage. After what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit faded. I slumped against a tree, gasping for breath. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd seen. Who were these people? What were they preparing for? As my breathing steadied, I realized I had a decision to make. I could try to find my way back to Ranger Station and report what I'd found. But would anyone believe me? And even if they did, by the time any official action was taken, the group might be long gone. The other option was to go back, to try and gather more information. It was risky, possibly suicidal. But something told me that this group was a threat that couldn't be ignored. Against my better judgment, I decided to return to the compound. This time, I'd be more careful. I spent the next few days observing from a distance, using all my wilderness skills to stay hidden. What I saw chilled me to the bone. The group was indeed preparing for something, stockpiling supplies and weapons. They ran drills, practiced combat scenarios, and pored over maps of the surrounding area. But it was the indoctrination that disturbed me the most. I watched as new recruits were brought in, usually young and vulnerable looking. They were subjected to long sessions with the bearded leader, emerging with that same zealous look in their eyes. On the third night, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. The bearded man was speaking to his lieutenants, outlining their plans. "The first strike will be against the ranger station," he said. "We'll take control of communications, cut off access to the park. Then we move on the nearby towns. By the time the outside world realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." I'd heard enough. This wasn't just some fringe group preparing for doomsday. They were planning an actual attack, and soon, I had to warn someone. I began to make my way back through the forest, my mind racing with plans. But in my haste, I made a fatal mistake. I took a route too close to one of their patrol paths. A shout went up, and suddenly I was running for my life again. But this time they were prepared. They herded me, using their knowledge of the land to cut off my escape routes. I found myself being driven back towards the compound. As I burst into the clearing, I was immediately surrounded. Rough hands grabbed me, disarming me and forcing me to my knees. The bearded leader approached, his eyes glinting in the firelight. Well, he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "Our curious ranger returns. I must admit, I'm impressed by your persistence. Not many could have evaded us for so long." I glared up at him, defiant despite my fear. "You won't get away with this. People will come looking for me." He chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "Oh, I'm counting on it. In fact, you've just become a very important part of our plans." As they dragged me away, I realized the full extent of my mistake. Not only had I failed to warn anyone, but I just handed this madman the perfect hostage. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. I was kept isolated, only interacting with my guards and occasionally the leader himself. He seemed intent on converting me, spinning tales of societal collapse and the righteousness of their cause. But with each passing day, I also learned more about their operations. They were larger and more organized than I'd initially thought, with supporters in nearby towns and even some local law enforcement. I knew I had to find a way to escape, to warn someone before it was too late. But as I lay in my makeshift cell each night, listening to the sounds of the compound preparing for war, I couldn't help but wonder. Was it already too late? Had my discovery of this hidden community set in motion events that couldn't be stopped? One thing was certain. The peaceful forest I'd sworn to protect had become the staging ground for something terrible. And I, the ranger who was supposed to be its guardian, had unwittingly become the key to its destruction. As I plotted my escape, I knew that even if I made it out alive, nothing would ever be the same. The hidden dangers lurking in the wilderness were no longer just bears or treacherous terrain. They were the darkest aspects of humanity, armed and ready to unleash chaos on an unsuspecting world. The ancient Egyptian vase shouldn't have moved on its own. But as I stared at the security footage, my blood ran cold. There it was, clearly shifting position between frames, with no sign of human intervention. Little did I know, this seemingly impossible occurrence would plunge me into a night of terror that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality and the thin line between the past and present. I'd been working as a night watchman at the city museum for about 6 months. It was a quiet job, perfect for a graduate student like me who needed time to study. Most nights, I'd make my rounds, check the security feeds, and then settle in with my anthropology textbooks. The hardest part of the job was usually just staying awake, but that night changed everything. It started like any other shift. I arrived at 10 p.m., relieved the day guard, and began my first round of checks. The museum was eerily quiet, the exhibits casting long shadows in the dim emergency lighting. I'd gotten used to the creepy atmosphere, or so I thought. Around midnight, I was watching the security feeds when something caught my eye. The camera focused on the Egyptian exhibit showed the prized centerpiece, a 4,000-year-old ceremonial vase, clearly moving about an inch to the left. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and rewound the footage. There it was again. One frame, the vase was in its usual spot. The next, it had shifted. Impossible, I muttered to myself. I knew every inch of that exhibit. The vase was heavy, securely placed behind bulletproof glass. There was no way it could move on its own. I decided to investigate, telling myself it must be a glitch in the camera system. As I approached the Egyptian wing, an unsettling feeling crept over me. The air felt heavier, charged somehow, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. The exhibit looked normal at first glance. The vase sat innocently on its pedestal, its intricate hieroglyphs catching the low light. But as I got closer, I realized with a start that it was indeed in a different position than usual. The painted eye of Horus, which normally faced the center of the room, was now turned slightly to the left. A chill ran down my spine. I'd been so sure it was a camera malfunction, but the evidence was right in front of me. Somehow, impossibly, the vase had moved. I pulled out my phone to call my supervisor, then hesitated. What would I even say? That an ancient artifact was playing musical chairs. I'd sound insane. As I stood there debating what to do, I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding. The jackal-headed statue of Anubis, which stood in the corner of the exhibit, had turned its head. Its obsidian eyes seemed to stare right at me. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. Statues didn't move. It had to be a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The vase was rotating slowly on its pedestal, the eye of Horus now facing directly at me. Panic surged through me. I turned to run only to find my path blocked. The mummy case, which had been standing against the far wall, was now directly behind me. Its painted eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. I let out a strangled yell and ducked around it, sprinting for the exit. As I ran, I could hear movement all around me. Pottery rattling in its cases, stone scraping against stone. The soft thud of footsteps that should not exist. I burst out of the Egyptian wing, gasping for breath. The rest of the museum seemed normal, quiet and still. Had I imagined it all? Slowly, my heart still racing, I turned back to look at the exhibit. What I saw made my blood run cold. Every statue, every artifact was facing the doorway, facing me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, through the quiet halls of the museum, past motionless dinosaur skeletons and silent dioramas. I didn't stop until I reached the security office, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it, panting. With shaking hands, I pulled up the security feeds on the monitor. The Egyptian exhibit looked normal again, everything in its proper place. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? But then I saw it. The vase moved again, just a tiny shift. And then the Anubis statue turned its head, looking directly at the camera. I watched in horror as, one by one, every artifact in the exhibit came to life. Statues stepped off their pedestals, ancient tools floated out of their cases, hieroglyphs began to writhe and move on the walls. I should have called for help, should have hit the alarm, done something. But I was frozen, transfixed by the impossible scene unfolding on the monitor. The mummy case opened, and a figure stepped out. Not a desiccated corpse, but a man dressed in the regalia of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. He surveyed the room, nodding in satisfaction, then looked directly at the camera. At me. He spoke, his words appearing as subtitles at the bottom of the screen, translated from ancient Egyptian to English by some impossible means. We have slept for too long. The time has come to reclaim what was taken. The pharaoh raised his staff, and the screen went black. For a long moment, I sat there in stunned silence. Then, slowly, I became aware of sounds coming from outside the office. Footsteps. Lots of them. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the feeds from other parts of the museum. What I saw defied belief. Exhibits from every era were coming to life. Roman soldiers marched in formation down one hallway. A woolly mammoth lumbered through the Ice Age display. In the medieval section, knights were mounting horses that shouldn't be alive. And they were all converging on the security office. On me. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to get out of there. But how? I was surrounded by impossibilities, by history come to life with unknown intentions. A pounding on the door made me jump. Open. In the name of Ramesses II. A voice boomed in ancient Egyptian, somehow understood. I looked around frantically for an escape route. The air vent was too small, the windows barred. I was trapped. The pounding grew louder. I could hear other voices now, a cacophony of languages from across time. The door began to splinter. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and stood ready, facing the door. With a final crash, the door burst open. The pharaoh stood there flanked by a Roman centurion and a medieval knight. Behind them, I could see a crowd of historical figures stretching down the hallway. "What do you want?" I managed to croak out. The pharaoh stepped forward, his eyes boring into mine. "We want what was taken from us. Our artifacts, our history, our stories. We have been prisoners in your museums for too long." I swallowed hard. I don't have the authority to give you anything. I'm just a night watchman. The pharaoh smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "Oh, but you have something far more valuable than mere authority. You have knowledge of this modern world. You will be our guide." Before I could protest, the knight stepped forward and grabbed my arm. His gauntlet felt cold and all too real. "Come," the pharaoh said. "We have much to learn, and the night is young." As they dragged me out of the office, into a museum now teeming with life from every era of history, I couldn't help but wonder, was this a nightmare I would wake up from? Or the beginning of a new, impossible reality? The exhibits had come to life. History was literally repeating itself, and I was caught in the middle of it all. As we marched towards the museum exit, towards an unsuspecting world, I realized that my quiet job as a night watchman had become something far more extraordinary and terrifying. The night was indeed young, and it promised to be one that would change not just my life, but potentially the course of history itself. The lighthouse beam cut through the darkness, a futile attempt to pierce the wall of rain and wind that battered the coast. I squinted into the tempest, my knuckles white on the railing, searching for any sign of life in the churning waters below. That's when I saw him, a lone figure clinging to a piece of driftwood, waving frantically. In that moment, I had no idea that my act of mercy would unleash a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I've been the keeper of this lighthouse for over a decade. It's a solitary life, but one I've come to appreciate. The rhythmic flash of the light, the constant moan of the foghorn, they've become as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. But nothing in all my years here could have prepared me for that night. The storm had been raging for hours, one of the worst I'd seen in years. I'd already helped guide 2 fishing boats to safety, their captains no doubt thanking whatever god they believed in for the beacon of my light. But as midnight approached and the storm showed no signs of abating, I feared the worst was yet to come. That's when I spotted him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Surely no one could survive in those waters. But there he was, a dark speck against the foaming waves, arms flailing in desperate plea for help. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my emergency kit and rain gear and raced down the spiral staircase of the lighthouse. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet as I burst out the door, but I pushed forward. The rocky path down to the small cove was treacherous in the best of conditions. In this storm, it was nearly suicidal. By the time I reached the water's edge, my lungs were burning and my clothes were soaked through. I could barely make out the man now, the waves threatening to swallow him at any moment. I waded in, the icy water shocking my system. "Hold on," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "I'm coming." I swam with all my might, fighting against the current that threatened to dash me against the rocks. As I got closer, I could see the man more clearly. He was younger than I expected, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. With one final push, I reached him, grabbing onto the piece of driftwood he clung to. "I've got you," I gasped, struggling to keep both our heads above water. "Let's get you to shore." The swim back was even harder, weighed down as I was, but adrenaline and determination pushed me forward. Finally, my feet touched the bottom, and I half dragged, half carried the man onto the beach. We collapsed onto the wet sand, both of us gasping for air. "Thank you," the man wheezed between breaths. I thought I was done for. "Let's get you inside," I said, helping him to his feet. "And you need to warm up." The climb back to the lighthouse was slow and arduous. The man leaned heavily on me, his strength clearly spent. By the time we made it inside, we were both shaking from cold and exertion. I sat him down by the small stove in my living quarters, wrapping him in every blanket I could find. As I busied myself making hot tea, I studied him more closely. Despite his ordeal, there was something about him that put me on edge. His eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with an intensity that seemed out of place for someone who'd just cheated death. "I'm John," I said, handing him a steaming mug. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Tom," he said. "Tom Harris." "Well, Tom, how did you end up out there? Was there a shipwreck?" Tom's hands tightened around the mug. "Something like that," he muttered. "It's all a bit of a blur." I nodded, not wanting to push him too hard. "You're safe now. We can sort everything out in the morning." As I turned to check on the lighthouse beam, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Peeking out from under Tom's sleeve was a tattoo, a distinctive design I recognized from wanted posters I'd seen in town. This man wasn't a shipwreck victim. He was an escaped convict. My mind raced. What should I do? I was miles from the nearest town with no way to call for help. The storm was still raging outside, making any attempt to leave impossible. I was trapped here with a potentially dangerous criminal. I tried to keep my voice steady as I turned back to Tom. "More tea?" I asked, forcing a smile. He nodded, his eyes never leaving me. I could see the change in him now, the gratitude replaced by calculation. He knew that I knew. "You've been very kind, John," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I'd hate for anything to ruin that." The threat was clear. I swallowed hard, my hand shaking slightly as I poured the tea. "No need to worry," I said. "You're my guest here." Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good, because I think I'll be staying for a while, at least until this storm blows over." The next few hours were a tense dance. I went about my duties, checking the light and monitoring the storm, all too aware of Tom's eyes following my every move. He asked questions about the lighthouse, about how often ships passed by, about my communication with the mainland. I answered as vaguely as I could, my mind working overtime to find a way out of this situation. As dawn approached and the storm began to subside, I knew I had to act. Tom had dozed off in the chair, lulled by warmth and exhaustion. This might be my only chance. I crept towards the door, planning to make a run for it. But as my hand touched the knob, a floorboard creaked beneath my feet. Tom's eyes snapped open. In an instant, he was on his feet, all pretense of weakness gone. "Going somewhere," he growled. I backed away, my hands raised. "Just checking the weather," I lied, He advanced on me, his face twisted with anger and desperation. "I can't let you leave," he said. "I've come too far to be caught now." I felt the wall against my back. There was nowhere left to go. Tom reached into his pocket, pulling out a jagged piece of metal, a makeshift weapon he must have had hidden on him. "I'm sorry, John," he said, raising the weapon. "You seem like a decent guy, but I can't take any chances." In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw the glint of metal as it arced towards me. I saw the storm-tossed sea through the window behind Tom. And I saw my chance. With a sudden burst of energy, I ducked under Tom's arm and tackled him. We crashed into the window, the old glass shattering under our combined weight. For a terrifying moment, we teetered on the edge, the drop to the rocks below yawning before us. Then, we were falling. The world spun around us as we plummeted towards the water. I felt the impact knock the breath from my lungs, the icy sea closing over my head. I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air. Tom was a few feet away, struggling to stay afloat. The current was pulling us both towards the rocks. In that moment, I had a choice to make. I could try to save him again, risking my own life in the process. Or I could save myself, leaving him to the mercy of the sea. The keeper in me, the part that had rushed out into the storm to save a stranger, wanted to help. But the man who had just been attacked, who had seen the darkness in Tom's eyes, knew better. I turned and swam for shore, each stroke carrying me further from the man I had rescued and the nightmare he had brought to my doorstep. As I pulled myself onto the rocks, I heard a final, desperate cry, then silence. I looked back at the churning water, but there was no sign of Tom. The sea had claimed him, washing away the danger he posed. But as I climbed the path back to the lighthouse, I knew that the memory of that night would stay with me forever. The light still turns, warning ships away from the treacherous coast. But now it serves as a reminder to me as well. A reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous storms are the ones we invite into our lives, and that not everyone who reaches out for help has good intentions. As I resume my duties, watching the horizon for ships in need, I can't help but wonder, when the next cry for help comes, will I answer? Or will the memory of Tom and the night that almost cost me everything hold me back? Only time will tell. For now, I keep my vigil, a solitary guardian against the darkness, both natural and human. The first sign of trouble was a gunshot echoing through the forest, shattering the tranquil dawn. As a wildlife photographer, I was used to the sounds of nature, but this blast of human violence sent a chill down my spine. Little did I know, my passion for capturing the beauty of the wild was about to plunge me into a deadly game of cat and mouse with ruthless poachers. I'd been camping in this remote section of the national park for 3 days, hoping to photograph the elusive snow leopard. The park rangers had warned me about increased poaching activity, but I'd brushed off their concerns. After all, I was here for photos, not confrontation. As the gunshot's echo faded, I grabbed my camera and crept towards the sound. My heart raced, torn between the instinct to flee and the journalist's urge to document. The thick underbrush made progress slow, but I moved as quietly as possible, years of tracking animals serving me well. After about 10 minutes, I heard voices, rough, angry whispers in a language I didn't recognize. I dropped to my stomach, crawling the last few yards to the edge of a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. 3 men stood over the body of a magnificent tiger. Its orange and black coat was stained red, lifeless eyes staring at nothing. One man held a rifle, while the others worked quickly to remove the animal's valuable parts, teeth, claws, and skin. I raised my camera with trembling hands, the long lens allowing me to capture clear images of the poachers' faces. Evidence, I told myself. Something to bring these monsters to justice. The shutter's soft click sounded deafening in the quiet forest. One of the men's heads snapped up, eyes scanning the tree line. I held my breath, willing myself to be invisible. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was looking right at me. Then his gaze moved on, and I let out a silent sigh of relief. But I knew I couldn't stay. I had the evidence I needed, and every second I lingered increased the risk of discovery. I began to inch backward, moving as slowly and carefully as I could. A twig snapped under my knee, the sound impossibly loud. "What was that?" one of the men growled. "Check the trees." Panic surged through me. I abandoned stealth and scrambled to my feet, running as fast as I could through the dense forest. Behind me, I heard shouts and the crashing of boots through underbrush. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face. My only thought to put as much distance between myself and the poachers as possible. I could hear them gaining on me, their knowledge of the terrain outweighing my head start. A bullet whizzed past my ear, splintering the bark of a tree next to me. They were shooting at me now, all pretense of secrecy abandoned. I zigzagged, trying to make myself a harder target, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. I burst out of the tree line onto a rocky slope. Without breaking stride, I half ran, half slid down the incline, sending small avalanches of pebbles skittering ahead of me. At the bottom, I dove behind a large boulder, finally allowing myself a moment to catch my breath. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. I peered around the edge of the rock, seeing the poachers emerge from the forest above. They paused, scanning the slope for signs of my passage. "Spread out," the leader barked. "He couldn't have gone far. Find him." I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The boulder was at the edge of a swift-moving river. Normally, I wouldn't consider trying to cross it, but now it seemed like my only option. Taking a deep breath, I sprinted for the water's edge. A shout went up behind me, followed by more gunfire. I dove into the icy current, the shock of the cold water driving the air from my lungs. The river's powerful flow swept me downstream, away from the poachers, but also dangerously close to jagged rocks that threatened to dash me to pieces. I struggled to keep my head above water, clutching my waterproof camera bag to my chest. The evidence it contained was too important to lose. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to grab onto a low-hanging branch and pull myself to the shore. I lay there on the bank, gasping and shivering, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. But all I could hear was the rush of the river and my own pounding heart. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet. I was soaked to the bone, bruised and disoriented, but alive. And more importantly, I still had my camera. I knew I couldn't linger. The poachers might have given up the direct chase mile, but they would likely be searching the area. I needed to find help, to get my evidence to the authorities before it was too late. Using the sun to orient myself, I began the long trek back towards the ranger station. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent my heart racing, convinced that at any moment I'd find myself staring down the barrel of a poacher's gun. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion set in. My waterlogged clothes felt like they weighed a ton, and each step was a monumental effort. But I forced myself to keep moving, driven by the memory of that beautiful tiger lying dead in the clearing. It was late afternoon when I finally stumbled into the ranger station's clearing. The shocked faces of the rangers told me I must have looked as bad as I felt. Poachers? I managed to gasp out before collapsing. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was wrapped in warm blankets, given hot tea, and questioned extensively by both the park rangers and local police. I handed over my camera, the memory card containing the damning evidence of the poachers' crimes. As I sat there, slowly warming up and regaining my strength, a grim satisfaction settled over me. The authorities now had clear images of the poachers, faces, and their vehicle. It wouldn't bring back that tiger, but it might prevent future killings. But my relief was short-lived. As night fell, one of the rangers burst into the station, his face pale. "We've got reports of a fire," he said urgently. "A big one, on the north side of the park. Right where you said you encountered the poachers. My blood ran cold. They're destroying the evidence, I realized aloud. The ranger nodded grimly, and potentially killing a lot more animals in the process. I stood up, shaky but determined. We have to stop them. The head ranger looked at me skeptically. You've been through enough today, let us handle this. But I shook my head. I know where I saw them. I can guide you there faster than you'd find it on your own. Every minute counts. There was a moment of tense silence as the rangers exchanged glances. Finally, the head ranger nodded. All right, but you stay in the vehicle. No heroics. Within minutes, we were racing through the darkening forest in rugged jeeps, sirens blaring. As we got closer, I could see an ominous orange glow on the horizon. The fire was spreading fast. We arrived at the edge of the blaze to find chaos. Animals fled in panic, small ones darting under the wheels of our vehicles. The heat was intense, even from a distance. There, I shouted, pointing to a gap in the flames. 3 figures were running towards a parked truck, loaded with what I assumed were more illegally obtained animal parts. The rangers sprang into action, their training evident in their coordinated movements. They split up, some focusing on containing the poachers, while others began emergency fire suppression efforts. I stayed in the Jeep as promised, but I couldn't just sit idle. I pulled out my camera again, documenting the unfolding scene. If any of the poachers escaped, I was determined to have clear images of them to aid in their capture. The next hour was a blur of shouting, gunfire, and the roar of the growing inferno. But in the end, the good guys won. The poachers were captured, their truck of illegal goods seized. The fire, while damaging, was brought under control before it could spread to the wider forest. As dawn broke, casting a surreal light over the smoldering landscape, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Horror at the destruction, grief for the animals lost, but also a fierce pride in having played a part in bringing these criminals to justice. One of the rangers approached me, a tired smile on his soot-stained face. Your photos were the key, he said. Without them, we might never have caught these guys. You did good, photographer. I nodded, too exhausted for words. As I watched the poachers being led away in handcuffs, I realized my relationship with this forest had fundamentally changed. I had come seeking beauty, seeking to capture the majesty of nature through my lens. Instead, I had been thrust into the ugly reality of the threats facing these magnificent creatures. But as I raised my camera one last time, focusing on a pair of deer emerging cautiously from the undamaged part of the forest, I knew I had found a new purpose. My photos would no longer just showcase nature's beauty. They would serve as a record, a warning, and a call to action. The forest had shown me its darkest side. But in doing so, it had also revealed the depth of my commitment to protecting it. As I clicked the shutter, capturing new life emerging from the ashes of destruction, I silently vowed to use my skills not just to document the wild, but to defend it. The key card slid into the lock with a soft click, but something felt off. As the night clerk of this small-town motel, I'd checked in hundreds of guests, but none had ever made the hair on the back of my neck stand up like this one. His eyes darted nervously, his fingers twitched, and the bulky duffel bag he clutched seemed unnaturally heavy. Little did I know, my gut feeling was about to plunge me into a night of terror that would change my life forever. I've been working the night shift at the Pinewood Motel for about 3 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of quiet time to work on my novel. Most nights are uneventful, a few late check-ins, maybe a noise complaint or two. But from the moment he walked in, I knew this night would be different. He stumbled through the door around 11 p.m., the bell above the entrance jingling discordantly. The man was in his mid-30s, with disheveled brown hair and 3 days' worth of stubble. His clothes were rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in them, and there was a wild look in his eyes that set me on edge immediately. I need a room, he said, his voice hoarse and urgent. Just for the night. Cash only. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral as I pulled up the vacancy list on the ancient computer. Of course, sir. We have a few singles available. How does room 237 sound? He nodded jerkily, already pulling out a wad of crumpled bills. As he counted out the payment, I couldn't help but notice his hands were shaking. There was also a dark stain on his sleeve that looked suspiciously like blood. I handed him the key card, forcing a smile. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Smith," he said quickly. Too quickly. "John Smith." "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." As Mr. Smith hurried off to his room, practically running down the hallway, I debated what to do. My instincts were screaming that something was very wrong here. But what could I do? Call the police because a guest seemed nervous? They'd laugh me off the phone. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but my eyes kept drifting to the security monitor that showed the parking lot. About an hour after checking in, I saw Mr. Smith emerge from his room, looking around furtively before hurrying to his car. He opened the trunk and pulled out another duffel bag, this one even larger than the first. My curiosity got the better of me. I switched the monitor to the hallway camera just in time to see him struggling with the heavy bag, finally managing to drag it into his room. What on earth was in those bags? My mind conjured up all sorts of possibilities, each more sinister than the last. Drugs, weapons, or something even worse. I knew I should mind my own business. It wasn't my job to play detective, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't do something, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Taking a deep breath, I made a decision. I'd do a quick welfare check. Knock on the door, make up some excuse about a plumbing issue, just to get a look inside the room. If everything seemed normal, I'd let it go. If not, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. The walk down the hallway to room 237 felt like the longest of my life. Each step seemed to echo loudly, and I was sure my pounding heart could be heard through the thin walls. As I approached the door, I could hear muffled sounds from inside, frantic movement, and what sounded like crying. I hesitated, my hand raised to knock. Was I making a huge mistake? What if he was armed? What if I was walking into something I couldn't handle? Before I could change my mind, I rapped on the door. "Maintenance," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but we've had some reports of plumbing issues on this floor. Need to check your bathroom real quick." The sounds inside the room abruptly ceased. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, footsteps approaching the door. It opened a crack, and I could see one of Mr. Smith's eyes peering out at me. "There's no problem here," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Please leave." I put on my best apologetic smile. "I'm really sorry, sir, but it's management's orders. It'll only take a minute, I promise." He seemed to debate internally for a moment, then reluctantly opened the door wider. "Make it quick," he growled. As I stepped into the room, the first thing that hit me was the smell. A coppery, metallic scent that I recognized with a sinking feeling in my stomach. Blood. The room was a disaster. Clothes were strewn everywhere, the bed sheets torn off and bundled in a corner. One of the duffel bags was open on the bed, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked disturbingly like a human hand before Mr. Smith moved to block my view. "The bathroom's over there," he said, pointing to the far side of the room. His other hand was behind his back, and I had a sickening feeling I knew what he was holding. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady as I moved towards the bathroom. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of here to call the police. But if I made a run for it now, would I even make it to the door? As I reached for the bathroom door handle, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A muffled thump coming from inside the bathroom. Then, unmistakably, a whimper. Our eyes met, and in that moment, we both knew the charade was over. Mr. Smith's face contorted with rage rang, and he lunged at me, the knife in his hand glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. I reacted on pure instinct, grabbing the desk lamp and swinging it with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening crack, and he went down hard. For a moment I stood there frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. Then another whimper from the bathroom snapped me back to reality. With shaking hands, I grabbed the key from the unconscious man's pocket and unlocked the bathroom door. What I found inside will haunt me for the rest of my days. A young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. She couldn't have been more than 20. "It's okay," I said, my voice trembling as I worked to untie her. "You're safe now. I'm going to call for help." As soon as she was free, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her, murmuring reassurances, as I fumbled for my cell phone to call 911. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the motel, paramedics tended to the young woman, and detectives questioned me over and over about what had happened. It turned out Mr. Smith was actually Michael Reeves, a serial killer who had been terrorizing the Midwest for months. The woman in the bathroom was his latest victim, but thankfully, I had interrupted him before he could complete his gruesome ritual. As dawn broke, I sat on the curb outside the motel, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. A detective approached, a grim smile on his face. "You did good, kid," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "You saved that girl's life. Not many people would have had the guts to do what you did." I nodded numbly, still trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wished I had just minded my own business, gone about my night like any other. But then I thought of that young woman, of the life she now had ahead of her because I had acted on my instincts. As the police cars began to pull away and the first curious onlookers started to gather, I knew my quiet life as a night clerk was over. There would be statements to give, maybe even a trial to testify at. My name would be in the papers, my face on the local news. But as I watched the young woman being helped into an ambulance, her eyes meeting mine with a look of profound gratitude, I knew I wouldn't change a thing. Sometimes, the most important moments of our lives come when we least expect them. In the quiet hours of the night when the rest of the world is asleep. I may have checked in a killer that night, but in doing so, I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew existed. And as I finally allowed the exhaustion to overtake me, I realized that my uneventful nights at the Pinewood Motel were a small price to pay for the knowledge that I had made a difference, that I had saved a life. The next time my instincts tell me something's off, you can bet I'll be listening. Because sometimes being nosy isn't just about satisfying curiosity. Sometimes it's about being the hero someone desperately needs. The moment I saw the blood on his shirt, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary fare. As a cab driver in this city for 15 years, I'd seen my share of strange passengers, but the desperation in this man's eyes told me I was about to get involved in something far beyond a simple ride home. Little did I know, my decision to pick him up would plunge me into a night of terror, forcing me to choose between my safety and my conscience. It was just past midnight, the streets slick with recent rain, neon signs reflecting in puddles like portals to another world. I'd been driving for hours, the late-night shift always a mix of drunks, night owls, and the occasional lost soul. I was about to call it a night when I saw him. He was standing on a corner in one of the rougher parts of town, arm outstretched, eyes darting around nervously. Even from a distance, I could tell something was off. His clothes were disheveled, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. Every instinct told me to keep driving. But something, call it curiosity, compassion, or just plain stupidity, made me pull over. As soon as he got in, the metallic scent of blood filled the cab. Up close, I could see the dark stain spreading across his abdomen, partially hidden by his jacket. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd just drive," he gasped, slumping down in the seat. "Anywhere. Fast." I pulled away from the curb, my mind racing. Who was this guy? What had happened to him? And more importantly, what was I getting myself into? "Look, man," I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "You're bleeding pretty bad." Maybe we should get you to a hospital." "No hospitals," he said sharply, then winced in pain. "They'll find me there." "Who's a they?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes and pressed his hand harder against his wound. We drove in tense silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of the engine and his labored breathing. I kept one eye on the road and one on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. After about 20 minutes, when we were well out of the city, he spoke again. "Pull over. I need a minute." I hesitated, but the pleading look in his eyes made me relent. I pulled onto the shoulder of the deserted highway, killed the engine, and turned to face him. "All right," I said. "I think it's time you told me what's going on. Who are you running from?" He sighed, wincing as he shifted in his seat. "You ever make a mistake so big, so monumentally stupid, that you knew your life would never be the same?" I nodded slowly, thinking of my own past regrets. "Well, I made that mistake," he continued. I got involved with some bad people, thought I could outsmart them, make some quick cash. But they caught on, and now..." He gestured to his bloody shirt. "Jesus," I muttered. "So what now?" "You can't run forever." "I just need to get to a safe place," he said. "I know someone who can help, but it's a long drive. I'll pay you double your rate if you take me." I should have said no. Should have told him to get out of my cab and never look back. But there was something in his eyes, a mixture of fear and hope that made me pause. "Triple rate," I said finally, "and you tell me everything. No more secrets." He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Deal." As we pulled back onto the highway, he began to talk. His name was Alex, and he'd gotten mixed up with a drug trafficking ring. He was supposed to be their accountant, helping them launder money. But he'd gotten greedy, skimmed off the top, thinking they'd never notice. They noticed. "So who shot you?" I asked, piecing together the story. "One of their enforcers," Alex replied, his voice tight with pain. "I managed to get away, but they'll be looking for me. That's why we can't go to a hospital. They have people everywhere." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable we were out here on the open road. "And this person we're going to see, you're sure they can help?" Alex nodded. Let's just say she specializes in making people disappear. New identities, that sort of thing." Great, I thought. Not only was I harboring a fugitive, but now I was an accessory to whatever illegal witness protection scheme he was cooking up. We drove through the night, the landscape changing from urban sprawl to rolling countryside. I kept a vigilant eye on the rearview mirror, jumping at every set of headlights that appeared behind us. Around 3 a.m., as we were passing through a small town, Alex suddenly tensed up. "That black SUV," he said, his voice tight. "It's been behind us for the last 10 miles. I checked the mirror, my heart rate spiking. He was right. The vehicle was keeping its distance, but it was definitely tailing us." "Hold on," I said, pressing down on the accelerator. The cab surged forward, and I took a sharp turn onto a side street. The SUV followed. "Shit," Alex muttered. "They found us." My mind raced, trying to remember every car chase scene I'd ever seen in movies. I took random turns, doubling back, trying to lose our tail. But the SUV stayed with us, getting closer with each passing minute. "There," Alex shouted, pointing to a narrow alley between two buildings. "Turn there." I didn't hesitate, wrenching the wheel to the side. The cab screeched into the alley, barely fitting between the walls. I held my breath, praying we wouldn't get stuck. We burst out the other side, and I immediately took another turn. When I checked the mirror again, the SUV was gone. "I think we lost them," I said, relief flooding through me. But Alex wasn't celebrating. "They'll find us again," he said grimly. "We need to ditch the cab. It's too recognizable." I wanted to argue, to tell him there was no way I was abandoning my livelihood. But deep down, I knew he was right. We were in too deep now. We left the cab in a parking lot on the outskirts of town and continued on foot, sticking to back alleys and shadows. Alex was leaning heavily on me now, his wound clearly taking its toll. "How much further?" I asked, supporting most of his weight. "Not far," he gasped. "There's a bus station a few blocks from here. We can catch a ride to the next town." As we turned a corner, I saw the neon sign of the bus station glowing in the distance. We were going to make it. Then I heard the screech of tires behind us. "Run!" Alex yelled, pushing me forward. We sprinted towards the station, adrenaline overriding exhaustion and pain. I could hear footsteps pounding behind us, getting closer with each second. We burst into the station, startling the few late-night travelers waiting for their buses. Without stopping, we ran straight through to the boarding area. A bus was just pulling out. Without thinking, I grabbed Alex and made a leap for the closing doors. We tumbled inside, the doors slamming shut behind us. As the bus pulled away, I saw two men in dark suits run into the station, their faces contorted with anger. We'd made it by seconds. Alex and I collapsed into seats, both of us breathing heavily. The few other passengers stared at us warily, but no one said anything. "Thank you," Alex said quietly after a while. "You saved my life." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "What now?" He smiled weakly. "Now, we disappear." As the bus carried us into the unknown, I realized my life had irrevocably changed. I was no longer just a cab driver. I was a fugitive, a conspirator, a man on the run. But looking at Alex, seeing the gratitude in his eyes, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes, in the darkest of nights, we find our true selves. And sometimes, a simple cab ride can become the journey of a lifetime. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. After all, the meter was still running, and this was turning out to be one hell of a fare. The neon sign flickered outside, casting an eerie glow through the grimy windows of Lou's Diner. It was 2 a.m., and the group that had just walked in made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Their eyes were wild, their movements erratic, and something about them screamed danger. Little did I know, my gut feeling was about to be proven right in the most terrifying night of my life. I'd been working the graveyard shift at Lou's for about 6 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me time to work on my screenplay during the quiet hours. Most nights were uneventful. A few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe a couple of drunk college kids wanting greasy food to sober up. But this night was different from the moment that group walked in. There were 5 of them. 3 men and 2 women. They looked like they'd been through hell, their clothes disheveled and dirty, hair matted and wild. The tallest man, who seemed to be the leader, had a nasty-looking cut above his eye that hadn't been treated. They slid into a booth near the back, their eyes darting around the diner suspiciously. I approached their table, pen and pad in hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Welcome to Lou's. What can I get for you folks tonight?" The leader looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and intense. "Coffee. Lots of it. And whatever food you can get out fastest." I nodded, jotting down the order. 5 coffees and 5 specials coming right up. As I turned to head back to the counter, I heard one of the women mutter, "We can't stay long. They'll be looking for us." My heart started racing. Who was looking for them? Were they criminals on the run? I tried to push the thoughts away as I poured their coffee and put in the order for their food. It wasn't my business. I just needed to serve them and hope they'd leave quickly. But as the night wore on, their behavior became increasingly erratic. They wolfed down their food like they hadn't eaten in days, constantly glancing out the windows. The leader kept getting up to peer out the blinds, his hand twitching near his waistband in a way that made me suspect he was carrying a weapon. I busied myself wiping down the counter, trying not to stare, but I couldn't help overhearing snippets of their hushed conversation. "We need to keep moving," one of the men said. "They could have tracked us here. We're all exhausted, the other woman argued. We need rest or we'll make mistakes. The leader slammed his fist on the table, making me jump. We don't have a choice. If they catch us, it's over. For all of us. I was starting to seriously consider calling the police when the bell above the door jingled. Two men in dark suits walked in, their faces grim and purposeful. The atmosphere in the diner instantly changed, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. The group in the booth went dead silent, their bodies rigid with fear. The leader's hand disappeared under the table, and I was certain he was gripping a gun. The men in suits approached the counter, their eyes scanning the diner. One of them pulled out a badge. FBI, we're looking for some dangerous fugitives. Have you seen anyone suspicious tonight? My mouth went dry. I glanced at the group in the booth, saw the desperation and fear in their eyes. In that split second, I had to make a decision that could change everything. No, sir, I heard myself say. It's been a quiet night, just the usual truckers and night owls. The agent's eyes narrowed, studying my face. You're sure about that? These people are extremely dangerous. Hiding them would be a federal offense. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I'm sure. Nobody fitting that description has come in tonight. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. All right. If you see anything suspicious, call this number immediately. He handed me a card, then turned to his partner. Let's check the gas station down the road. As soon as they left, the leader of the group was on his feet. We need to go, now. They scrambled out of the booth, throwing money on the table. But before they reached the door, the leader turned back to me. Why? He asked simply. I shrugged, my heart still pounding. I don't know what's going on, but you folks look scared, not dangerous. I hope I made the right call. He nodded solemnly. You did. Thank you. You may have just saved more lives than you know. And with that, they were gone, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had appeared. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Had I just aided and abetted fugitives? Or had I helped innocent people escape some kind of injustice? The FBI agent's words echoed in my mind. These people were supposedly dangerous. But my gut told me there was more to the story. As the night wore on, my mind raced with possibilities. Were they whistleblowers on the run from some corrupt government agency? Victims of a conspiracy who knew too much? Or had I made a terrible mistake, letting actually dangerous criminals slip away? Around 4 a.m., the bell jingled again. My heart leapt into my throat, expecting the FBI agents to return. But it was just old Joe, right on schedule for his pre-dawn coffee and pie. You look like you've seen a ghost, kid, he said as he settled onto his usual stool. Rough night? I managed a weak smile. You could say that, Joe. You could definitely say that. As I poured his coffee, I debated whether to tell him what had happened, but I decided against it. The less people who knew, the better. Whatever was going on, I was now involuntarily part of it. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxious glances at the door and jumping at every small noise. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I practically ran out of the diner, desperate to get home and try to make sense of everything. But as I unlocked my apartment door, I froze. There, slipped under the door, was a plain white envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a short note and a flash drive. The note read, "You took a chance on us. Now we're taking a chance on you." The truth is on this drive. Be careful who you trust. The world needs to know, but they'll do anything to keep it hidden. Thank you for your courage. I stared at the flash drive, my mind reeling. Whatever was on it, I knew my life would never be the same once I viewed its contents. I had a choice to make: plug it in and potentially put myself in danger, or destroy it and try to forget this night ever happened. As I sat there, the first rays of dawn creeping through my window, I realized that the choice had already been made the moment I lied to the FBI agent. I was in this now, for better or worse. With a deep breath, I booted up my laptop and plugged in the flash drive. As files began to populate my screen, documents, photos, videos, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Whatever this was, it was big. And somehow, I, a simple diner worker with dreams of Hollywood, had stumbled right into the middle of it. The sun rose fully as I delved into the files, each revelation more shocking than the last. I realized that my simple act of trusting my instincts in the diner had set in motion a chain of events that could change everything. As I finally closed my laptop, my mind swimming with the weight of what I'd learned, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. For months, I'd been trying to write a screenplay, searching for that perfect story that would launch my career. And now, the most incredible story I could imagine had quite literally walked right into my diner. I knew the coming days and weeks would be dangerous. The people after my mysterious visitors wouldn't give up easily. But as I finally lay down to sleep, exhausted but exhilarated, I felt more alive than I had in years. My graveyard shift at Lou's Diner had turned into the prologue of an adventure I never could have imagined. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, I was ready. After all, every great story needs a reluctant hero, right? And on this fateful night, that hero turned out to be me. A simple diner worker with a penchant for trust and a newfound taste for danger. The eerie blue glow pulsing from deep within the forest was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my 15 years as a forest ranger. As I cautiously approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and an inexplicable sense of dread washed over me. Little did I know, my discovery of those strange lights would plunge me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the woods I'd sworn to protect. It was supposed to be a routine night patrol, the kind I'd done countless times before, checking for illegal campers or signs of wildfires. The air was crisp with the scent of pine, and a full moon cast long shadows between the trees. Everything seemed normal, until I saw that otherworldly light flickering through the branches. I radioed back to base, reporting my position and intention to investigate. In hindsight, I should have waited for backup, but curiosity got the better of me, and I ventured deeper into the woods, following the pulsating blue glow. As I got closer, I began to hear chanting. Low, rhythmic, and in a language I didn't recognize. My hand instinctively went to the gun at my hip, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever was producing that light. I crested a small hill and suddenly found myself on the edge of a large clearing. What I saw there made me question my sanity. Dozens of figures in hooded robes stood in a circle around a glowing blue crystal the size of a car. They swayed in unison, their chanting growing louder and more frenzied. The crystal pulsed in time with their voices, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. I ducked behind a large tree, my heart pounding. This was way beyond anything I'd been trained for, illegal campers or poachers I could handle. But this was something else entirely. As I watched, transfixed, the chanting reached a fever pitch. The blue light from the crystal intensified, becoming almost painfully bright. And then, impossibly, a tear seemed to open in the very air above the crystal. Through that tear, I caught glimpses of something. A landscape that was alien and wrong, with geometries that hurt my eyes to look at. Tentacle-like appendages reached through the opening, grasping at the air. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a whimper, because suddenly, one of the robed figures turned and looked directly at me. Even from this distance, I could see that its eyes glowed with the same blue light as the crystal. "Intruder," it screeched, in a voice that was far from human. "Seize them." Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, and I could hear an inhuman howling that chilled me to my core. Just when I thought I couldn't run another step, I burst out of the tree line and found myself at the edge of a cliff. Below, a river rushed by, swollen from recent rains. I was trapped. I turned to face my pursuers, drawing my gun with trembling hands. The robed figures emerged from the trees, moving with an unnatural, gliding motion. Their hoods had fallen back, revealing faces that were only vaguely human, with two wide mouths and those glowing blue eyes. "You should not have come here, Ranger," one of them said, its voice a rasping hiss. "You have seen things not meant for mortal eyes." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "What was that thing in the clearing?" The creature's mouth stretched into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "We are the guardians of the gate. For centuries, we have kept the boundary between worlds intact. But now, the stars are right, and the great old one stirs in its slumber." My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It sounded like something out of a horror novel, not anything that should exist in the real world. "You have a choice, Ranger," the creature continued. "Join us in our great work, or be cast into the void." I looked from the creatures to the cliff edge behind me. The drop was easily 100 feet, the river below churning and violent. It was certain death. But as I looked back at the inhuman faces of my pursuers, I realized death might be preferable to whatever they had in mind. "I choose option 3, I said, and before I could second-guess myself, I turned and leaped off the cliff. The fall seemed to last forever. Wind rushed past me, and I had a moment to reflect on the absurdity of my situation. Then I hit the water, and everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was washed up on a rocky shore several miles downstream. Every part of my body ached, and I was pretty sure I had a couple of broken ribs, but I was alive. As I lay there, gasping and shivering, I tried to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to believe it had all been a hallucination, maybe caused by some toxic fungus I'd inhaled. But I knew, deep down, that it had been real. I managed to drag myself to my feet and stumbled through the woods until I found a road. A passing trucker took pity on me and gave me a ride back to the ranger station. My colleagues were shocked when I stumbled in, soaking wet and babbling about glowing crystals and inhuman cultists. They assumed I'd had some kind of accident and hit my head. I was sent to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed me with a concussion and exposure. In the days that followed, I debated whether to tell the full story of what I'd seen, but every time I started to, the words stuck in my throat. Who would believe me? I'd be labeled as crazy, probably lose my job. And a small, terrified part of me wondered if those creatures might come for me if I talked. So I kept quiet. I told everyone I'd fallen while on patrol and washed downstream. They seemed to accept it, though I caught concerned looks from my co-workers when they thought I wasn't looking. I threw myself back into my work, trying to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was the same. Every time I went into the forest, I found myself jumping at shadows, half expecting to see that blue glow through the trees. I avoided that section of the woods where I'd seen the crystal, making excuses to send other rangers there instead. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, the memory of that night began to fade, taking on the quality of a bad dream. I started to wonder if maybe I had imagined it all. Then, one night, I was working late at the station when a call came in. A hiker had reported seeing strange lights deep in the woods, in the exact area where I'd encountered the cult. My blood ran cold as I listened to the hiker's description. It matched what I'd seen, down to the eerie blue glow. I knew I had a choice to make. I could ignore it, pass the call along to someone else, pretend I'd never heard it. Or I could face my fears, go back out there, and try to stop whatever dark ritual was taking place. As I sat there, the radio in my hand, I realized that this was bigger than just me. Whatever those creatures were, whatever they were trying to do, it threatened not just the forest I'd sworn to protect, but potentially the whole world. With shaking hands, I keyed the radio. "This is Ranger Thompson. I'll check it out. As I geared up, checking my flashlight and making sure my gun was loaded, I tried to push down the fear threatening to overwhelm me. I didn't know what I'd find out there in the dark woods, or if I'd even survive the night. But I knew I had to try. Because sometimes, being a forest ranger means more than just protecting trees and wildlife. Sometimes, it means being the only line of defense against threats most people couldn't even imagine. As I stepped out into the night, the full moon casting long shadows across the parking lot, I took a deep breath. Whatever happened, I was done running. It was time to face the darkness head-on. The forest waited, its secrets and horrors hidden in the shadows between the trees, and I was going to uncover them, no matter the cost.